The electricity bill sat on the kitchen counter like an accusation. $347 past due, with a disconnection notice scheduled for Friday. 3 days away. Claire Whitmore stared at the number until it blurred, her coffee gone cold in a mug that said, "World's Best Mom," in chipped letters. Her daughter Mia had given it to her for Mother's Day 2 years ago, back when they could still afford things like sentiment. Outside their studio apartment, Portland rain hammered against windows that leaked at the corners. Claire had stuffed towels there months ago, but they'd stopped absorbing and now just sat sodden and useless, much like she felt most days. The math was simple and brutal. Her paycheck from the cleaning service covered rent, with $200 left over. Utilities took $180. Food, if she was careful, if she bought store-brand everything and skipped meals herself, ran about $150, which left her perpetually $130 short every month, a deficit that compounded and grew like cancer. The letter had arrived yesterday, addressed to her in handwriting she didn't recognize. Inside was a single sheet of paper from a law firm in Hood River, Oregon, 2 hours east, regarding the estate of Theodore Whitmore, her uncle, her father's brother, a man she'd met exactly once, at her father's funeral 15 years ago. He'd stood apart from the other mourners, uncomfortable in a suit that looked borrowed, smelling faintly of something earthy and strange. He'd pressed a business card into her hand. "If you ever need anything." Then he'd vanished before the burial ended. She'd been 19 then, pregnant, scared, too proud to call a stranger for help. Now she was 34, still scared, but pride had been beaten out of her by rent increases and medical bills, and the grinding reality that single mothers who worked 3 jobs still couldn't afford to keep the lights on. The letter explained that Theodore had died 6 months ago. No other living relatives. His property, all assets, would default to her as sole heir. There was a catch, naturally. Back taxes totaling $18,000. Property assessment fees. Legal processing. All due within 90 days, or the state would seize everything and auction it to cover debts. Claire had laughed when she read it. Bitter, sharp laughter that made Mia look up from her homework with worried eyes. $18,000 might as well be $18 million. She had $347 she couldn't pay. How was she supposed to come up with $18,000? But curiosity had driven her to Google the address. 4271 Cascade Highway, Hood River, Oregon. Street view showed an enormous structure set back from the road, mostly hidden by overgrown vegetation. What she could see looked like something from another era. Long, low buildings with strange architectural features. Peaked roofs that seemed designed for purposes other than simple shelter. Land that stretched back in a forest as far as the camera had captured. The property tax records listed it as commercial agricultural. 8.5 acres. Last assessment, $240,000. If she could somehow get a loan against it, maybe she could pay off the back taxes and then sell it quickly. Turn Theodore's neglected legacy into a lifeline that would keep them housed and fed for the first time in years. Mia appeared in the kitchen doorway, 12 years old and already too wise about their situation. "Mom," Mrs. Chun said, "there's a food bank distribution tomorrow. Should I go after school?" The question carried no judgment, just practical assessment of their reality. Claire's chest tightened with the familiar ache of failing her daughter in ways that would leave scars no apology could heal. "We'll be okay, baby." The lie tasted like ash. "I need to take a trip this weekend. Your Aunt Sarah said you can stay with her." Sarah wasn't actually Mia's aunt, just a coworker at the cleaning service who'd become the closest thing either of them had to family. The kind of person who understood poverty because she lived it too, who traded babysitting for help with repairs, who created kinship out of shared survival. That Saturday morning, Claire drove east in her 2004 Honda Civic that burned oil and made concerning noises whenever she exceeded 50 miles per hour. Mia was safely with Sarah, probably being spoiled with pancakes and cartoons, normal childhood moments that Claire couldn't consistently provide. The guilt sat heavy in her stomach as she navigated through Portland sprawl toward the Columbia River Gorge. The landscape changed as she drove. Urban density giving way to suburbs, then farmland, then the dramatic geography of the gorge itself. Waterfalls cascaded down cliffs. Windsurfers dotted the river despite the early hour and cold November air. Hood River appeared as a small town clinging to the river's edge, its downtown full of breweries and adventure gear shops that catered to tourists with money to spend on recreation. Claire had never been to Hood River before, had never understood why Uncle Theodore had chosen to live here, so far from everything. But as she followed her phone's GPS directions away from downtown, on a Cascade Highway heading east, something shifted in the air. The tourist town dropped away. Forests pressed closer to the road. Properties grew more spread out, houses replaced by acreage and structures that spoke of agricultural purpose rather than residential comfort. 4271 appeared suddenly, almost hidden by overgrowth that had clearly been neglected for years. A rusted mailbox tilted at an angle. Whitmore barely visible under moss and weathering. No driveway was apparent at first, just a gap in the vegetation that might once have been an entrance. Claire pulled onto the shoulder and got out, her coat immediately inadequate against the wind that howled down from the mountains. The fence was chain link, 8 feet tall, sagging in places but still forming a barrier. A gate stood closed but not locked, its metal orange with rust. Claire pushed it open with a screech that scattered birds from nearby trees. Beyond it, a dirt path wound through wild grass and blackberry brambles that had claimed everything with thorny persistence. She walked carefully, testing each step on ground made treacherous by hidden roots and holes. The path curved, and suddenly the buildings revealed themselves, and Claire's breath caught somewhere between amazement and dread. The main structure stretched at least 200 feet long, maybe 40 feet wide. Victorian-era architecture, she guessed, though adapted for purposes she couldn't immediately identify. The building was divided into sections, each with different roof heights and window configurations. Some sections had elaborate ventilation systems, pipes and fans that looked Art Nouveau in their decorative metalwork. Other sections featured massive windows, glass panels that would have flooded the interior with natural light before grime and years of neglect had turned them opaque. Behind the main building stood 3 smaller structures, each identical, low-slung, with peaked roofs and what looked like specialized doors on the sides. Storage buildings, maybe, or processing facilities. Everything was weathered gray-brown, paint long since surrendered to the elements. Vines had claimed the walls, some climbing all the way to the roof lines where they disappeared into gaps in the shingles. But despite the decay, despite the obvious abandonment, Claire felt something unexpected. Not dread, but possibility. The bones were solid. The architecture was distinctive. Someone had built this with care and vision, had poured resources into creating something that mattered. Someone who happened to be her uncle, a man she'd dismissed as eccentric when she should have seen him as determined. A white pickup truck pulled up outside the gate, and an older woman emerged wearing a county assessor's badge on a lanyard. "You must be Claire Whitmore." Her voice carried the flat efficiency of someone delivering bad news as routine. "Betty Morrison, County Property Services. I'm here to do the final assessment before foreclosure proceedings." "Foreclosure?" Claire's voice came out sharper than intended. "I inherited this property. It's mine. Yours with $18,000 in back taxes." Betty pulled out a tablet, already tapping in notes. "Plus $3,200 in county fees for maintenance and code violations. Plus interest accrued. You're looking at $22,000 total, due in 62 days. The number hit like a physical blow. 22,000. Claire had $473 in her checking account. "What is this place?" "Silk Moth Farm." Betty said it like it was obvious, like everyone should know what that meant. "One of the last in Oregon. Your uncle raised Bombyx mori, domesticated silk moths. Specialized in rare mutations, if the records are accurate. Been abandoned since he died, though. Property zoned agricultural, which gives you some flexibility, but the structures are in violation of multiple safety codes. Roof damage, electrical hazards, possible environmental contamination from the processing chemicals." Claire tried to process this information and found her brain refusing to cooperate. "Silk moths? Like for making fabric?" "Yep." Theodore supplied silk producers nationwide. Small operation by industrial standards, but apparently quite prestigious in niche markets. Betty walked toward the buildings, forcing Claire to follow. Bombyx mori don't exist in the wild anymore. They've been domesticated so long they can't survive without human care. Can't fly, can't find food, completely dependent. Your uncle dedicated 40 years to breeding and raising them. They reached the main building's entrance, a double door that hung crooked on corroded hinges. Betty pushed it open and the smell rolled out. Not rot, exactly. Something else. Organic, earthy, faintly sweet underneath the must and mildew. Like a greenhouse left sealed for years, vegetation breaking down in darkness. The interior was vast and segmented. They stood in what appeared to be an entry hall, once probably elegant with its high ceiling and decorative woodwork. Now everything was draped in dust thick enough to show their footprints. To the left, a door stood ajar, revealing what looked like an office space. Desk, filing cabinets, walls covered in photographs and diagrams she couldn't make out from this distance. To the right, another door led to darkness. Betty shone a flashlight through it, illuminating rows of what looked like wooden racks or shelving systems extending back into shadow. Rearing rooms, where he kept the moths during their life cycle. Straight ahead, at the end of the entry hall, an ornate set of double doors waited. These were different from the others. Carved wood, intricate patterns that suggested craftsmanship beyond simple utility. The doors were closed, and even from 30 feet away, Claire could see they were sealed with multiple locks. That's the Cocoon room. Betty's voice shifted, becoming less bureaucratic and more uncertain. Never been inside. Your uncle kept it locked always. County inspectors tried to access it twice for code compliance, but Theodore refused. Had lawyers citing agricultural trade, secrets, and proprietary processing methods. Eventually, the county just marked it as exempt from inspection. Something in Claire's chest tightened with a feeling she couldn't name. What's in there? Cocoons, presumably. That's where the moths would spin silk before emerging. But it's been sealed for 6 months. Betty shook her head. Whatever's in there is probably ruined. Silk degrades without proper environmental control. Temperature, humidity, all of it matters. They explored the rest of the accessible building over the next hour. The rearing rooms were eerie and sad. Rows of empty wooden racks that would have held trays of moths in various life stages. Claire found remnants, dried mulberry leaves, brittle fragments of what might have been cocoons, the desiccated remains of moths that had died after Theodore stopped caring for them. The office space yielded more information. Betty photographed everything for her assessment, while Claire read through papers that painted a picture of Theodore's life. He'd purchased this property in 1982, built the specialized structures himself over 5 years of backbreaking work. Started with common silk moth strains, then gradually developed rare color mutations through careful breeding. His customer list included high-end fabric producers in Paris, Milan, Tokyo. Financial records showed he'd made decent money, not wealthy but comfortable. Then around 2018, the income had increased dramatically. Records of sales for amounts that made Claire's eyes widen. $50,000 for a single shipment of silk, $80,000 for another, $120,000 for specialized cocoons with some kind of unique property the paperwork didn't fully explain. He was doing well. Betty's voice carried surprise as she reviewed the same documents. Really well. Makes you wonder why he let the property taxes lapse. Maybe he was sick. Claire found medical bills in one drawer. Cancer treatments. End-of-life care that had apparently consumed most of his savings in the final year. He'd chosen to pay for doctors instead of taxes, betting he'd survive long enough to catch up. He lost that bet. As they prepared to leave, Claire's eye caught something on the office wall. A photograph, black and white, showing Theodore standing beside the ornate double doors to the Cocoon room. He was smiling, genuinely happy in a way the funeral version of him had never been. And there was writing on the photo, in the bottom margin, in handwriting that matched the business card he'd given her 15 years ago. For those who understand patience, silk reveals its secrets. Betty locked up the building and returned to her truck to complete the assessment. Claire sat on the front steps of the main building, looking out at the overgrown property, mind racing through calculations that still didn't add up. The land itself might be worth $240,000, but only if someone wanted to buy an abandoned silk moth farm. The back taxes and fees totaled $22,000. Even if she could somehow get approved for a loan using the property as collateral, which seemed unlikely given her credit score and employment situation, she'd be betting everything on finding a buyer quickly. But what if Theodore had left something valuable? Those late sales records suggested he'd developed something special in his final years. Something worth serious money. The Cocoon room had been locked and kept secret, protected even from county inspectors. What if there was silk in there? Rare silk worth recovering and selling? Ms. Whitmore. Betty approached with paperwork. Based on my assessment, I have to recommend the county proceed with foreclosure. The structures need at least $40,000 in repairs to meet basic safety codes. Environmental remediation for the chemicals used in silk processing could cost another $20,000. Even if you cover the back taxes, you're looking at financial obligations that far exceed the property's market value. Claire took the papers, seeing the official stamps and signatures that would transfer Theodore's life work to the state. 62 days until it was gone forever. What if I wanted to buy it? Buy it. Betty looked at her like she'd suggested flying to the moon. Ms. Whitmore, do you have $22,000? Not yet. But if I did, I'd own this property clear, right? No other liens or obligations. Technically, yes, but I'll find the money. Claire stood, decision made with the same desperate certainty that had driven her to flee Mia's father with 2 suitcases and nothing else. Give me the 62 days. Betty drove away, shaking her head, clearly writing Claire off as another delusional person chasing impossible dreams. Claire walked back to the building, using her phone's flashlight to navigate through the entry hall to those ornate double doors. Up close, the carving revealed itself as moths. Hundreds of them, wings spread in various positions, creating patterns that were almost hypnotic. The locks were substantial, commercial grade, the kind that required keys she didn't have. But as she examined them, her fingers found something unexpected. A small plaque mounted beside the door frame, brass tarnished nearly black with age. She rubbed it clean with her sleeve and read, "The moths remember what we forget. Patience transforms. What seems like ending is only waiting to begin." Theodore's words had to be. They carried the same strange poetry as the photograph caption. Claire pressed her hand against the carved door, feeling the wood warm under her palm despite the building's chill. What did you hide in there, Uncle Theodore? What were you trying to protect? The drive back to Portland took place in darkness, November sunset coming early and final. Claire's mind churned through possibilities, discarding most as impractical, circling back to one stubborn idea that refused to be dismissed. If Theodore had been selling silk for $100,000 plus per shipment in his final years, and if he'd sealed away his most valuable work in that room, then maybe there was enough value locked behind those doors to cover the back taxes and even provide a cushion for her and Mia. But she needed to get inside, need to assess what was actually there versus what her desperate hope was inventing. Need to move fast because 62 days wasn't much time to liquidate silk even if it turned out to be valuable. She pulled over a rest stop and Googled high-end silk buyers Oregon on her phone. 3 results appeared, all in Portland. She added them to her contacts, making notes about their specialties and business hours. At home, Mia was already asleep on Sarah's couch, curled around a stuffed elephant that had been her comfort object since toddlerhood. Sarah met Claire at the door with the quiet understanding of someone who knew better than to ask questions. She had fun. "We made cookies. There's a Tupperware for you in my car. Sarah, I need to ask something crazy." Crazier than usual? But Sarah's smile was gentle, inviting confidence rather than mockery. Claire explained about Theodore, the property, the silk moths, the locked cocoon room, and the insane idea that maybe this inheritance wasn't just another problem, but actually a solution. She laid out her plan, such as it was. Get inside the cocoon room, assess what's there, contact buyers, try to generate enough quick cash to cover the back taxes. Use the property value as collateral for a small loan that would let her repair enough to make the place saleable. Sarah listened without interruption, her expression cycling through concern, doubt, and finally something that might have been cautious hope. Claire, what if there's nothing in that room? What if it's just empty space and your uncle was eccentric rather than secretly wealthy? Then I'll be exactly where I am now. Broke, struggling, 3 days from having my electricity shut off. Claire's voice steadied. But what if there is something? What if Theodore was trying to help me by leaving this, and I'm too scared to even try? The next morning, Sunday, Claire returned to Hood River alone. She'd borrowed a better flashlight from the cleaning service, along with a toolkit and a crowbar. Breaking into the Cocoon room felt wrong, felt like desecration. But the county was going to bulldoze everything in 2 months anyway. At least this way, Theodore's work might have a chance at meaning something. The drive seemed shorter in daylight, less ominous. The property looked different too. Morning sun revealed details she'd missed in yesterday's gloom. The specialized ventilation systems weren't just decorative, they were engineering marvels. Copper and brass fittings that had weathered to beautiful green patines. Adjustable louvers that would have controlled airflow with precision. This had been a serious operation, not some hobbyist vanity project. Claire let herself into the main building, prepared for the smell this time. The entry hall looked less threatening in daylight, filtering through dirty windows. Dust motes danced in the beams, creating an almost magical atmosphere. She moved to the ornate double doors and examined the locks more carefully. 3 deadbolts, 2 key locks, 1 combination lock that looked modern, probably added in Theodore's final years. She tried the crowbar on the deadbolts first, wedging it between door and frame, applying pressure gradually. The wood was old but solid, resisting her efforts. Sweat soaked through her shirt despite the cold. Her arms shook from the strain. The first deadbolt gave way with a crack that echoed through the empty building. Claire froze, heart pounding, absurdly worried she'd be caught breaking into property she legally owned. Silence returned. She kept working. The second deadbolt fought harder, the wood around it still solid enough to grip. She had to reposition 3 times, finding new leverage points before it finally surrendered. The third deadbolt proved easiest, already loose from age and moisture damage. The key locks required different tactics. Claire used a screwdriver to remove the entire lock assemblies, working carefully to avoid damaging the ornate doors. The wood screws came out reluctantly, threads stripped from decades of temperature changes and humidity. 40 minutes of patient work freed both locks. The combination lock defeated her completely. She tried every number combination she could think of. Theodore's birthday, her birthday, the property address, random sequences. Nothing worked. Finally, frustrated and aware that time was passing, she used bolt cutters from the toolkit to simply cut the shackle. The lock fell away with a satisfying clunk. Claire stood before the doors, all barriers removed, and found herself hesitating. What if Sarah was right? What if this was just empty space? What if Theodore's final act had been locking away nothing, preserving a secret that didn't exist? The disappointment would be crushing. The end of hope she'd been building for less than 24 hours, but which already felt essential to survival. She pushed the doors open. The smell hit first. Not decay, not must. Something else entirely. Sweet, almost floral, with an undertone of earth and warmth. The kind of scent that made you think of summer meadows and afternoon naps in tall grass. The kind of scent that shouldn't exist in a sealed room in an abandoned building in November. Her flashlight beam cut through darkness that felt thick, almost textured. She found a light switch by the door and flipped it, not expecting it to work. But it did. Overhead fixtures flickered to life, revealing the Cocoon room, and Claire's breath stopped in her chest. The space was enormous, at least 60 feet long and 40 feet wide, with a vaulted ceiling that soared 20 feet at its peak. But what filled that space defied immediate comprehension. It looked like snow had fallen inside, coating every surface in white, except it wasn't snow. It was silk. Cocoons covered the walls in thick layers, clustered so densely they created texture like abstract art. Not white cocoons. Every color imaginable. Gold, amber, pale green, soft pink, deep violet, shimmering blue. They hung in clusters from specialized racks that lined the wall's floor to ceiling. They filled wooden trays stacked on tables arranged in precise rows down the center of the room. But the walls. God, the walls. Theodore had mounted cocoons there in patterns. Not random, but deliberate, creating images out of different colored silk. On the left wall, a woman's face emerged from tens of thousands of cocoons arranged by color gradient. On the right wall, a forest scene with trees rendered in brown and green cocoons, sky above in blues and violets, gold sunlight streaming through branches. The back wall showed a moth in flight, wings spread, created from cocoons in shades that shifted from deep amber at the body to pale gold at the wingtips. It was art. It was hundreds of thousands of cocoons. It was Theodore's entire final harvest, preserved and arranged with obsessive care. Claire walked forward in a daze, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. Environmental controls lined one wall, digital displays showing temperature and humidity levels maintained at precise specifications. That's why everything was preserved. Theodore had set up the room to continue operating even after his death. The power bill was probably one of the obligations driving the back taxes, but he'd prepaid it, made sure his final work would survive at least until someone found it. She touched a cluster of gold cocoons, feeling silk smooth and cool under her fingers. Each cocoon was roughly the size of a peanut, the moths inside long since emerged or died, leaving behind the silk shells that had protected their transformation. But these weren't ordinary cocoons. The colors were too vivid, the silk too lustrous. Whatever mutations Theodore had developed in his final years, they produced something extraordinary. A notebook sat on a workbench near the environmental controls. Claire opened it with trembling hands and found Theodore's records. Detailed notes about breeding lines, color mutations, silk quality assessments. And at the end, dated 2 weeks before his death, a final entry that made tears well up in her eyes. If Claire inherits this, tell her patience transforms everything. I spent 40 years developing these strains. The moths in this room represent genetic lines worth millions to the right buyer. But she must be careful. Apex Textiles has been watching my work. They tried to buy me out 3 times. When I refused, they threatened legal action, claimed my breeding methods violated their patents. They're wrong, but they have money and lawyers. Claire, if you're reading this, don't sell to Apex. Find independent buyers. Honor the moths' work. They gave their silk freely. Use it to transform your life the way they transform themselves. Your uncle, who should have been braver 15 years ago. Claire sat down on a wooden stool, notebook clutched her chest, crying in the middle of a room filled with millions of dollars worth of silk that might save her life if she could figure out how to liquidate it without being destroyed by corporate predators her uncle had spent years evading. The Monday morning after discovering the cocoon room, Claire called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Her supervisor at the cleaning service made disapproving noises about reliability and responsibility, but Claire barely heard them. She was too busy photographing cocoons from every angle, documenting the wall art, trying to count the sheer volume of silk Theodore had left behind. The numbers defied belief. She estimated roughly 200,000 cocoons in the room, possibly more. The racks held layers she hadn't initially noticed, cocoons tucked into every available space with systematic precision. If Theodore's notes were accurate, and if buyers existed who would pay fair market value, the room contained a fortune. But if was doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. She called the first silk buyer on her list, a textile importer in Portland's Pearl District. The woman who answered listened to Claire's breathless explanation with the patience of someone humoring a crank call. Ma'am, the domestic silk market in the United States is essentially non-existent. Bombyx Mori silk comes from Asia, produced at scales that make small American operations economically impossible. If your uncle was breeding silk moths, it was likely a hobby rather than a viable business. But he was selling silk for tens of thousands of dollars. Claire pulled up Theodore's financial records on her phone. I have invoices here. $50,000 to a fabric house in Milan. $80,000 to a producer in Tokyo. A pause. For what quantity? It doesn't specify quantity, just says premium genetic cocoons, full harvest, amber mutation line. Another pause, longer this time. What's your uncle's name? Theodore Whitmore. The woman's tone changed completely. Theodore Whitmore? The Theodore Whitmore who developed the Aurora strains. I don't know. He had a silk moth farm in Hood River. That's all I know. Where are you right now? I'm coming to see this. Don't talk to anyone else until I get there. The woman, whose name was Jennifer Chun, arrived at the farm 3 hours later driving a Tesla and wearing clothes that cost more than Claire's monthly rent. She was perhaps 40, Asian American, carrying herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in any room. Claire led her into the building, watching Jennifer's face as they walked through the entry hall. No expression yet, just professional assessment. Then Claire opened the doors to the cocoon room, and Jennifer stopped breathing for what felt like a full minute. Holy Mother of God. Jennifer walked forward slowly, hands outstretched but not quite touching anything, moving like someone in a museum encountering priceless artifacts. These are Aurora mutations. Gold, amber, rose, violet, emerald. I've seen photographs in industry journals, but Theodore never let anyone visit his operation. He was notoriously private. What makes them special? Claire followed Jennifer deeper into the room, watching her examine cocoons with increasingly excited energy. Standard Bombyx mori produce white or yellow silk. Useful but common. Aurora mutations produce colors naturally, without dye. The silk comes off the cocoon already colored, already lustrous in ways that dyeing can never replicate. Jennifer pulled out a jeweler's loupe and examined a violet cocoon closely. High-end fashion houses pay premium prices for natural colored silk. It's rare, difficult to breed consistently, and Theodore was apparently the world's leading expert. She moved to the wall art, studying the woman's face created from color gradient cocoons. This alone is worth 6 figures as installation art. The technical skill required to sort and place cocoons in exactly the right positions to create recognizable images. Jennifer shook her head. Your uncle was an artist as much as a scientist. Claire felt hope inflating dangerously in her chest. How much? For everything in this room. How much would buyers pay? Jennifer spent the next hour examining samples, taking notes, photographing specific clusters with professional equipment she pulled from her car. She counted rows, estimated quantities, checked Theodore's breeding records, and ran calculations on her phone. Finally, she looked at Claire with an expression that mixed sympathy and excitement. Conservative estimate? For the cocoons themselves, sold in lots to fashion houses and silk producers who understand their value, $3 to $5 million. For the wall art installations, if marketed properly to galleries and collectors who appreciate biological art, another $1 million. Maybe 2. The number hit Claire like a physical force. $5 million. $7 million. The electricity bill she'd been panicking over was $347. Her entire annual income from 3 jobs was maybe $32,000. $7 million was more money than she'd earn in multiple lifetimes of grinding poverty. But Jennifer's tone shifted, becoming serious. There are significant complications. First, this volume of premium cocoons flooding the market will depress prices. Supply and demand. You need to sell slowly, over years, to maintain value. Second, authentication and provenance matter. Buyers will need genetic testing to verify these are genuine Theodore Whitmore Aurora strains and not knockoffs. Third, and this is critical, Apex Textiles has been trying to acquire Theodore's genetic lines for a decade. They have deep pockets and lawyers who specialize in making small producers disappear. Theodore's notes mention them. Claire showed Jennifer the final notebook entry. He was right to be paranoid. Apex operates by acquiring or destroying competition. They'll offer you pennies on the dollar, and if you refuse, they'll tie you up in legal proceedings until you're forced to sell just to survive the court costs. Jennifer met Claire's eyes with intensity that demanded attention. I can help you navigate this, connect you with ethical buyers, protect you from predatory offers. But you need to move carefully, and you need to secure this property immediately. If Apex learns what you have before you're ready, they'll come at you with everything. Claire told Jennifer about the back taxes, the 62-day deadline, the $22,000 she didn't have. Jennifer listened with the growing horror of someone watching a disaster unfold. Jesus Christ, you're telling me you have millions in silk, but might lose it all because you can't cover $22,000 in taxes. That's about the size of it. Jennifer pulled out her phone. I'm making calls. There are buyers who will provide advances against guaranteed future sales. Specialty lenders who understand agricultural assets. We can structure financing that covers the taxes and gives you time to liquidate properly. She paused. But Claire, I need to be honest. This process will take months, possibly years. You'll be targeted by Apex and others who want this silk. Your life is about to become incredibly complicated. More complicated than working 3 jobs to stay poor. Claire's laugh came out bitter. I'll take complicated if it means Mia gets to have a childhood where she's not counting pennies at the grocery store. They spent the rest of that day developing a strategy. Jennifer contacted 3 high-end buyers she trusted, sending them samples and documentation. She arranged for genetic testing of cocoons to verify their authenticity and establish provenance. She connected Claire with a specialty lender who dealt with agricultural estates, explaining that Theodore's reputation alone made the silk valuable collateral. By evening, Claire had preliminary offers from 2 buyers. $150,000 for immediate purchase of a small lot, providing the advance she needed to cover back taxes. Contracts that guaranteed continued purchases over the next 3 years, buying the remaining silk in structured lots that maintain market value. Combined potential earnings. For $0.2 million, assuming authentication verified Theodore's work and no legal complications arose. It's not the full $7 million. Jennifer explained as they sat in the farm office, reviewing contracts. But it's guaranteed money from reliable buyers who won't try to cheat you. And, critically, it keeps you solvent while we work through the larger liquidation. Claire signed the preliminary agreements with hands that shook. The buyers would conduct due diligence over the next 2 weeks, send experts to examine the cocoons, run genetic tests, verify everything. If authentication succeeded, funds would transfer in time to meet the tax deadline. What if Apex interferes? Claire asked. They will. Count on it. But now you have resources to fight back. And you have me. Jennifer's smile carried steel. I've been wanting to take on Apex for years. They've destroyed too many good producers. Your uncle's legacy is worth protecting. The news spread faster than Claire expected. Small towns talk, and Hood River was no exception. Betty Morrison from the county assessor's office mentioned the silk farm to colleagues. One of them had a friend who worked in textiles. That friend recognized Theodore Whitmore's name. By Wednesday, Claire's phone was ringing with calls from buyers, brokers, and journalists wanting to know about the legendary silk moth breeder's final harvest. She ignored most of them, focusing on the buyers Jennifer had vetted. But Thursday morning brought a call she couldn't avoid. Marcus Webb, CEO of Apex Textiles' North American division, wanted to meet. His assistant was insistent. Mr. Webb would be in Hood River Friday. Could Ms. Whitmore spare an hour? It would be in her interest. Jennifer advised refusing. He's coming to intimidate you. Make you an offer you can't refuse, except it'll be wrapped in threats. Then let him come. I want to see who I'm dealing with. Friday morning, Claire waited at the farm office while Mia was safely at school in Portland. Marcus Webb arrived precisely at 10 o'clock, driving a black Mercedes and wearing a suit that probably cost more than Claire's car. Mid-50s, silver hair, the kind of tan that came from golf courses and vacation homes. He looked at the dilapidated buildings with visible disdain. Ms. Whitmore. His handshake was firm, calculated. Thank you for seeing me. I'm sorry for your loss. Theodore was a brilliant man. Difficult, but brilliant. You knew him. We had discussions over the years. Apex made several generous offers to purchase his genetic lines and breeding facility. He declined. Called us corporate vultures, if memory serves. Marcus smiled like this was amusing rather than insulting. But that's water under the bridge. I'm here to make you an offer that benefits everyone. He pulled out a folder, sliding papers across the desk. $250,000 for the property and all contents. Immediate payment, no contingencies. We'll handle the back taxes, assume all liabilities. You walk away clean with $250,000 in your pocket. Claire had spent enough years being poor to recognize when someone was trying to cheat her. The silk alone is worth millions. Potentially worth millions if you can find buyers. If authentication succeeds. If you can afford to fight our patent challenges regarding breeding methodology. If you survive the legal costs of defending against corporate litigation. Marcus leaned back, confidence radiating. Ms. Whitmore, let me be frank. You're a cleaning lady with no experience in silk production, no industry connections, no resources to wage war against a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Theodore was smart enough to know he couldn't beat us. That's why he spent 40 years hiding here, producing small batches, staying beneath our radar. You don't have that luxury. You've already attracted attention. Take the money. Give your daughter a better life. Don't be stubborn like your uncle. The mention of Mia sent ice through Claire's veins. Are you threatening my daughter? Threatening? God, no. I'm simply noting that single mothers have enough challenges without adding corporate litigation to the mix. His smile stayed perfectly pleasant. Children need stability, security. Things are difficult to provide when you're tied up in lawsuits that drain your resources and time. Claire stood, decision made with perfect clarity. Get out. This meeting is over. Marcus didn't move. $250,000. That's my offer. It expires Monday. After that, we'll proceed through other channels. Legal channels that will cost you everything. Then I guess I'll see you in court. Get the hell off my property. He left still smiling, his Mercedes kicking up dust as it pulled away. Claire watched him go and called Jennifer immediately. Apex just made their opening move. What do they offer? $250,000. Threatened lawsuits if I refused. Standard playbook. They'll follow up with actual legal action within days. Patent challenges, environmental violations, zoning complaints. Death by 1,000 cuts designed to bleed you dry. Jennifer's voice carried grim certainty. But we're ready. I've already briefed the buyers. They're expediting authentication. And I've connected you with Ellen Rodriguez, an attorney who specializes in defending small producers against corporate agriculture predators. Ellen Rodriguez contacted Claire that afternoon. She was 42, Latina, with the kind of intensity that suggested personal investment beyond professional duty. Jennifer sent me your uncle's notes. The threats from Apex, the suspicious timing of his tax problems. This isn't coincidence. Apex has a pattern of targeting producers when they're vulnerable. Medical bills, family crises, anything that creates financial pressure. Then they swoop in with lowball offers wrapped in threats. Can we fight them? Depends how dirty they're willing to play and how much money you can spend on defense. But Jennifer's buyers are providing litigation insurance as part of the purchase contracts. That's unusual and suggests they really want this silk. Gives us leverage. Ellen paused. Claire, I need to know, are you prepared for this to get ugly? Apex doesn't lose gracefully. I've survived worse than corporate bullies. Have you? Because corporate bullying looks different than personal abuse. It's systemic, relentless, designed to make you feel like the walls are closing in until surrender seems like relief. Claire thought about Marcus' threat, about eviction notices and disconnection warnings, and the grinding daily terror of poverty. I've been living with walls closing in for years. At least now, I have something worth fighting for. The authentication process began Monday morning. 3 experts arrived. A geneticist from UC Davis, a silk quality specialist from the Fashion Institute of Technology, and an independent appraiser who verified provenance for high-value agricultural products. They spent 6 hours examining cocoons, running tests, comparing samples against Theodore's detailed breeding records. Claire watched them work, anxiety building with every careful measurement, every whispered consultation. Her entire future balanced on their assessment. If the silk was genuine Aurora strain, if Theodore's records were accurate, if the quality matched industry standards, then the contracts would execute, and she'd have enough money to save the property and transform her life. If not, she'd default on the tax deadline in 43 days and lose everything. The geneticist emerged first, looking odd. These are genuine Whitmore Aurora strains. The genetic markers are unmistakable. Your uncle developed something genuinely unique. The breeding records are meticulous, allowing us to trace lineages back through multiple generations. This is scientific treasure as much as commercial product. The silk specialist was equally impressed. Quality exceeds expectations. Thread strength, color fastness, luster, all superior to standard Bombyx Mori. The rose and violet variants in particular are extraordinary. I've never seen natural silk in these shades with this level of saturation. The appraiser's report came last, delivered with professional neutrality that made the numbers feel surreal. Based on quality assessment, market demand analysis, and comparable sales data, I estimate the Cocoon collection at $4.7 million. The wall art installations, valued separately, at approximately $1.3 million. Total appraised value, $6 million. $6 million. Claire sat in the office chair Theodore had probably occupied for 40 years and tried to process what that meant. She'd been terrified of a $347 electricity bill last week. Now professionals were telling her she owned $6 million in silk. Jennifer arrived that evening with updated contracts. The buyers are ready to proceed. First payment of $175,000 transfers tomorrow, enough to cover all back taxes and fees with cushion for legal defense and property repairs. Structured payments over 36 months for the remaining silk, with guaranteed minimum prices regardless of market fluctuations. You're protected. What's the catch? No catch. You deliver authenticated Aurora cocoons in agreed quantities. They pay you fair market rates. Everyone wins. Jennifer's expression turns serious. Except Apex. They're going to be furious when word spreads that you sold to their competitors. The money transferred Tuesday morning. Claire watched her bank balance update in real time. The number climbing from $347 to $175,347 in the span of 3 electronic seconds. She started crying right there in the bank parking lot, ugly sobs that scared the elderly couple walking past. She'd never had 5 figures in her account before. Never imagined she would. She paid the back taxes that afternoon, walking into the county office with a cashier's check and the satisfaction of watching Betty Morrison's jaw drop. You found the money. I found the silk. Claire couldn't keep the triumph from her voice. Theodore left me $6 million in cocoons. The property is mine, legally and completely. Betty's expression cycled through shock, calculation, and finally something that might have been respect. Well, I'll be damned. Maybe he was taking care of you after all. Claire wanted to celebrate, to pick up Mia early from school and take her somewhere nice for dinner. But as she walked to her car, a black Mercedes pulled alongside her. Marcus Webb emerged, his pleasant expression gone, replaced by cold calculation. Congratulations on securing funding. I assume you sold to Maison Etienne and Tokyo Fiber Arts. Claire said nothing. They're good buyers. Ethical, fair. Which makes this harder, actually. I prefer to crush you through their failure to pay, but they will pay. Which means I need to take a different approach. Marcus leaned against his car, casual in a way that felt threatening. We're filing patent challenges today, claiming Theodore's breeding methodology infringed on Apex genetic engineering patents. We're also filing environmental violations regarding chemical storage and disposal. And we're requesting county investigation into zoning compliance for commercial operations in agricultural zones. My lawyer said you try this. Your lawyer is competent, but she's one person. We're a corporation with unlimited legal resources and decades of experience destroying people like you. Marcus smiled. Here's what's going to happen. You'll spend the next 2 years fighting us in court. Your buyers might stick with you, might not. Market conditions change. Patience wears thin. Eventually, you'll be exhausted and broken and willing to settle. Then we'll acquire Theodore's genetic lines for a fraction of their value, and you'll walk away with just enough money to feel like you didn't completely lose. Or I fight you and win. No one fights Apex and wins. Marcus got back in his Mercedes. But I admire your optimism. It'll make the eventual defeat more satisfying. The lawsuits arrived Thursday. 3 separate filings, each thick with legal language that Ellen translated during an emergency video call. Patent infringement regarding breeding methodology. Environmental violations based on a 30-year-old inspection report. Zoning complaints alleging improper commercial use of agricultural property. They're throwing everything at you simultaneously. Ellen's voice carried frustration. Standard scorched earth tactics. Force you to defend on multiple fronts, drain resources, create pressure until settlement seems preferable to continued fighting. Can we win? Probably. The patent claims are weak. Theodore's breeding records predate their patents by decades. Environmental violations are manageable with proper remediation, which you now have money to fund. Zoning issues are even weaker since the property's been agricultural commercial for 40 years. Ellen paused, but winning costs money and time. Even with litigation insurance, this will consume the next year of your life. Claire thought about Mia, about the stability her daughter deserved, about the future that had seemed impossible a week ago. Then we fight, whatever it takes. The harassment began immediately. County inspectors appeared unannounced, demanding access to buildings and records. Environmental Protection Agency representatives followed, investigating allegations that turned out to be completely fabricated. Local newspapers received anonymous tips about dangerous chemical storage at the old silk farm, forcing Claire to issue public statements defending Theodore's practices. Her landlord in Portland suddenly decided to raise rent by 40%, forcing her to choose between paying or moving. When she complained, he shrugged. Market rates. Nothing personal. But Claire saw Apex's fingerprints all over it, creating pressure, making life difficult, betting she'd break under the accumulated weight. She moved instead, renting a small house closer to Hood River for less than her Portland apartment had cost. Closer to the farm, closer to the silk that represented her future. Mia changed schools mid-year, a transition that would have devastated Claire weeks ago, but now felt manageable with money in the bank and purpose driving them forward. Why are the bad people trying to take Uncle Theodore's moths? Mia asked one night, helping Claire organize breeding records in the farm office. Because they want to control something beautiful that they didn't create. They think money gives them the right to take whatever they want. Are we going to let them? Not a chance, baby. We're going to fight until they understand that some things are worth protecting. Jennifer flew to Hood River in December, bringing representatives from Maison Etienne who wanted to see the wall art installations before finalizing that portion of the purchase. Jacques Moreau was 63, French, with a refined aesthetic sensibility of someone who'd spent his life in luxury fashion. He walked into the Cocoon room and stopped breathing exactly like Jennifer had. Mon Dieu! He approached the woman's face on the left wall, studying the color gradations with jeweler's precision. This is mastery. Each cocoon placed with such care, such vision. The woman, she a specific person, yes? Claire consulted Theodore's notes. His wife. She died in 1995. Cancer. He never remarried. So this is love made permanent in silk. The moths transformed themselves, and he transformed their transformation into art that preserves memory. Jacques turned to Claire with tears in his eyes. Maison Etienne will pay $2 million for the 3 wall installations. We will carefully remove them, preserve them, display them in our Paris gallery. Your uncle's name will be honored. His wife will be remembered. This is beyond commerce. This is legacy. $2 million for wall art Claire had initially dismissed as eccentric hobby. Combined with the cocoon sales, she was looking at total proceeds exceeding $6 million. More money than she could properly comprehend, more than seemed real. But the lawsuits continued grinding forward. Depositions, document production, expert witnesses, all consuming time and energy. Ellen fought magnificently, but Claire could see the toll it took. Every week brought new filings from Apex, new allegations, new fronts that required defense. They're trying to exhaust us, Ellen admitted during a January strategy session. Even with litigation insurance covering costs, the psychological warfare works. Death by 1,000 cuts. Claire walked the property on cold winter evenings, checking environmental controls in the Cocoon room, maintaining temperature and humidity that kept Theodore's silk preserved. She thought about her uncle working here alone for 40 years, developing something beautiful while the world ignored or threatened him. She thought about his wife, dead nearly 30 years but immortalized in moth silk on a wall no one had seen. She understood, finally, what Theodore had been trying to tell her. Patience transforms everything. The moths spent weeks in their cocoons, seemingly dead, actually undergoing complete metamorphosis. Theodore had spent decades in this isolated farm, seemingly wasting his life, actually creating legacy that would provide for family he'd never really known. Now, it was Claire's turn to transform, to take the silk Theodore had left, the resources his patience had generated, and build something better from the wreckage of her previous life. February brought unexpected allies. Other small silk producers who'd been crushed by Apex reached out, offering testimony about similar tactics. Environmental regulators who'd investigated previous Apex properties came forward with evidence of the company filing false complaints as standard practice. Industry journalists wrote exposés about corporate consolidation in textile production and the independent producers being systematically destroyed. Public opinion shifted. Claire became a symbol. The single mom fighting a corporation, the heir protecting her uncle's legacy, the underdog refusing to surrender. Crowdfunding campaigns emerged without her requesting them, raising money for legal defense. Fashion industry figures spoke publicly about supporting independent producers against predatory consolidation. The pressure reversed. Apex's stock price dropped as negative publicity accumulated. Marcus Webb faced questions from the board about why he was waging war against a sympathetic single mother over patent claims that looked increasingly weak. The environmental violations got dismissed in March. The inspector's report revealed as outdated and irrelevant. The zoning complaints collapsed in April after county records proved 40 years of proper agricultural commercial operation, which left only the patent infringement claims, and those were dying slowly under the weight of Theodore's meticulous records proving his work preceded Apex's patents by decades. May brought settlement offers. Apex would drop all claims if Claire paid $100,000 and agreed not to sell to their direct competitors. Ellen laughed. They're trying to save face. Pretend they won something by extracting nuisance money. Counteroffer. Claire's voice carried steel earned through 8 months of fighting. They drop all claims, issue a public apology for harassment, and pay $500,000 to fund the Whitmore Foundation for Independent Silk Producers. Or we go to trial and let a jury hear how they've been destroying small producers for decades. Apex's lawyers tried to negotiate. Ellen held firm. You lose at trial, you lose in public opinion, and you open yourselves to further litigation from everyone you've crushed over the years. Take the settlement. Cut your losses. They settled June 1st. Public apology, foundation funding, dismissal of all claims with prejudice. Claire read the agreement in Ellen's office with Jennifer beside her and Mia in the next room coloring pictures of moths. We won. You won. Ellen smiled. And more importantly, you changed the game. Apex will think twice before pulling this again. Theodore's legacy isn't just silk. It's precedent. The final piece of the discovery came in July, a year after Claire first saw the Cocoon room. She was cataloging remaining inventory, preparing for the final shipment to Tokyo Fiber Arts, when she noticed something odd about the back wall. The moth in flight that Theodore had created from carefully placed cocoons looked different in certain light. The wing patterns seemed to shift, colors changing depending on viewing angle. She mentioned it to Jennifer, who brought Jacques Moreau out for consultation. The three of them stood studying the wall while evening sun streamed through windows, and suddenly Jacques gasped. Move! There, to the left. Now watch the wings. Claire shifted position and saw it. The wings weren't just art. They were text, created from cocoons arranged so precisely that letters emerged in specific lighting, words appearing as though written by invisible hand. Thank you for having patience. Transform your life like the moths transform themselves. The greatest treasure isn't silk. It's knowing you're capable of metamorphosis when the world says you're only capable of survival. Love, Theodore. Claire read it 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Her uncle had left a message only visible to someone who'd taken time to really see, to appreciate, to understand what he'd built. He'd been teaching her all along. The silk had value, yes. $6 million that would change her life. But the real gift was proving to herself that she could fight, could win, could transform from desperate single mom into someone who built legacy instead of just surviving day to day. Jennifer put an arm around her shoulders. He knew. Somehow he knew you'd need exactly this. Or he hoped that whoever inherited would be worthy of what he'd created. The Maison Etienne team arrived in August to carefully remove the wall installations. The process took 3 weeks, each cocoon photographed in place, numbered, and carefully extracted before being remounted on permanent backing. Jacques documented everything, creating a record of Theodore's methodology that would be studied by artists and scientists for generations. The Tokyo Fiber Arts final shipment completed in September. Claire stood in the now-empty cocoon room, bare walls showing where millions of cocoons had hung, environmental controls powering down for the first time in years. The space felt sacred, like a cathedral after services ended. Quiet, purposeful, waiting for whatever came next. Her bank account showed $6.2 million. The house in Hood River was paid off. Mia's college fund was established. The Whitmore Foundation had begun funding its first grant recipients. Ellen had moved on to representing 3 other producers facing similar apex pressure, armed with precedent from Claire's victory. Claire locked the cocoon room doors and walked out into Oregon's summer evening. Mia was at the house they now owned, probably watching television or reading, safe in ways Claire had once thought impossible. The property stretched around her, 8.5 acres of possibility. She'd been thinking about what to do with the buildings, the specialized infrastructure Theodore had created. Tearing them down seemed wrong, like destroying something sacred. But leaving them empty felt wasteful. Maybe she could reopen the operation. Maybe there were other rare moths worth breeding, other silk varieties worth developing. Maybe Theodore's work didn't have to end just because his life had. Maybe transformation was something that continued across generations. Moths becoming silk, silk becoming art, art becoming legacy, legacy becoming inspiration for whatever came next. Claire walked the property line as sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. Colors Theodore had spent 40 years breeding in a moth silk, and she understood finally what her uncle had been trying to tell her across death and distance. The moths spelled words on the wall, because transformation always required translation. What seemed like ending was only metamorphosis, waiting for someone patient enough to witness it. What looked like being trapped was actually the necessary containment that allowed complete reformation of self. She'd entered that cocoon room broke and desperate, believing she was worthless because the world had told her so for 34 years. She was emerging with resources and purpose, understanding finally that worth wasn't measured in paychecks or social status, but in the stubborn refusal to let circumstances define capability. Theodore had transformed himself from lonely widower into artist and scientist whose work would be studied for generations. The moths had transformed themselves from caterpillars into creatures capable of flight and creating silk more beautiful than anything humans could manufacture. And Claire had transformed from cleaning lady to CEO of her own future, from victim to victor, from survival mode to living with intention. The decision to reopen the silk moth operation came gradually, then all at once. Claire spent September and October researching, reading Theodore's decades of notebooks, watching YouTube videos about sericulture, connecting with the handful of remaining American silk producers who'd survived Apex's consolidation efforts. The property had the infrastructure. She had the capital. What she lacked was expertise, but that could be learned. Jennifer introduced her to Dr. Sarah Kim, an entomologist at Oregon State University who'd been studying Bombyx mori genetics for 15 years. Sarah was 39, Korean-American, with the kind of focused intensity that came from dedicating your life to understanding creatures most people found unremarkable. Theodore Whitmore's Aurora strains are legendary. Sarah examined Theodore's breeding records with the reverence of someone handling religious texts. I've cited his work in 12 papers, but I never met him. He refused all collaboration requests, wouldn't share genetic samples, wouldn't allow researchers on the property. Why? Probably because he understood that sharing meant losing control. Apex has a history of acquiring genetic material through academic partnerships, then patenting the results and excluding the original breeder. Sarah looked up from the notebooks. If you're serious about reopening this operation, I can help. But we need to be smarter than Theodore was. We need to document everything, establish clear IP protections, build networks that make suppression impossible. They started small. Sarah brought graduate students who needed thesis projects. They cleaned the rearing rooms, repaired environmental systems, and ordered mulberry trees to replace the wild-grown specimens that had overtaken the property. The trees would take years to mature, but Theodore's notes indicated he'd maintained a preserved mulberry leaf supply in specialized freezers. Claire found the freezers in November, located in a basement she hadn't known existed. The discovery came accidentally. She'd been measuring the main building's foundation for repairs when she noticed discrepancies. The interior dimensions didn't match the exterior. 20 feet of space unaccounted for, hidden somewhere beneath the structure. She called Sarah immediately. There's a basement. Theodore built a basement that's not on any county records. They found the entrance behind a false wall in what had been Theodore's office. A concrete staircase descended 15 feet into a climate-controlled space roughly 40 feet by 20 feet. Industrial freezers lined 3 walls, humming with power that explained part of Theodore's enormous electricity bills. The 4th wall held filing cabinets, a workbench, and a door marked with a biohazard symbol that made Claire's stomach clench. What the hell was he doing down here? Sarah's voice echoed in the underground space. The freezers contained exactly what Theodore's notes had suggested: tens of thousands of preserved mulberry leaves, vacuum-sealed and dated, enough to feed multiple moth generations. But they also contained something else. Vials. Hundreds of them, carefully labeled with alphanumeric codes Claire didn't understand, stored in specialized racks at precise temperatures. Sarah examined one vial, holding it up to the light. Genetic samples. Eggs, maybe your pupae. Preserved for future breeding. She read the label. Aurora, V7-2018. This would be 7th generation of violet strain from 2018. Is that unusual? For someone operating alone? Extremely. This level of genetic preservation requires sophisticated equipment and knowledge. Theodore wasn't just breeding pretty moths. He was conducting serious genetic research. The filing cabinets yielded more mysteries. Theodore's later notebooks, from 2015 onward, became increasingly cryptic. References to Project Metamorphosis appeared frequently, but without explanation. Financial records showed payments from organizations Claire didn't recognize. Biosphere International, Chrysalis Genomics, something called the Lepidoptera Preservation Consortium. These aren't textile companies. Sarah photographed pages with her phone. These are research organizations, genetics firms. Theodore was selling them something beyond silk. The door with the biohazard symbol required code. Claire tried Theodore's birthday, his wife's birthday, the property address. Nothing worked. She was considering calling a locksmith when Mia, who'd been exploring the basement with curious 12-year-old energy, pointed to something on the door frame. "Mom, there are moths carved here. Little ones." Claire looked closer. Mia was right. Tiny moth shapes, barely visible, etched into the metal frame. She counted them. 17. She tried entering 1 to 7 into the keypad. The lock beeped red. Then she noticed the moths weren't all the same size. Some larger, some smaller, arranged in a pattern. She counted again, this time by size. 4 large moths, 3 medium, 2 small, 1 tiny. She entered 4-3-2-1 into the keypad. The lock clicked green. The door swung open on hydraulic hinges, revealing a laboratory that looked like it belonged in a university research facility rather than a secret basement in rural Oregon. Microscopes, centrifuges, gene sequencing equipment, computers that still powered on when Claire hit the switches. The walls were covered in charts showing DNA sequences, protein structures, cellular diagrams. And at the center of the lab, a large glass terrarium containing something that made both Claire and Sarah stop breathing. Moths, but not Bombyx mori. These were larger, wilder, with wing patterns that seemed to shift as they moved. Their wings displayed colors that shouldn't exist in nature. Electric blue, iridescent purple, gold that looked almost metallic. About 20 of them, fluttering around mulberry branches, looking healthy and active despite being locked in a basement for over a year. Those aren't domesticated silk moths. Sarah's voice came out barely above a whisper. They can fly. Look at their wing musculature. Bombyx mori lost the ability to fly thousands of years ago through selective breeding. These are something else. Claire found Theodore's research notes on the lab bench. The project had started in 2010. Theodore had been attempting something that sounded like science fiction, reverse engineering domesticated silk moths to restore traits they'd lost during millennia of human cultivation. Wing strength for flight, navigation abilities, foraging instincts, all the characteristics that made wild moths capable of surviving without human intervention. But the notes went further. Theodore had been experimenting with genetic modifications that went beyond restoration. Enhanced color production, increased silk strength, extended lifespan. He'd been creating something new, something that had never existed in nature or through traditional breeding. This is genetic engineering. Sarah's hands shook as she read through the research. Serious, sophisticated genetic engineering. CRISPR technology, gene splicing, regulatory sequence modifications. Theodore was operating at a level that should have required a team of PhD scientists and millions in funding. Why? That's what I can't figure out. What was he trying to achieve? Sarah pulled up files on Theodore's computer, scanning through documents with increasing confusion. He wasn't trying to create commercial products. These moths couldn't be used for traditional silk production. They'd fly away, breed with wild populations, potentially disrupt ecosystems. This was pure research, exploration, trying to understand something fundamental about metamorphosis and genetic expression. One document stood out, a letter draft dated March 2020, addressed to someone at the National Institute of Health. Theodore explained his research, requested official oversight and funding, warned that his work had implications beyond textile production. The letter had never been sent. Instead, there was a note in the margin. They won't understand. They'll shut it down. Must continue alone. Claire photographed everything while Sarah collected samples for analysis. The moths in the terrarium watched them with what seemed like unusual intelligence, their antenna tracking movement, their wing patterns seeming to communicate in ways Claire couldn't interpret. We need to secure this lab immediately. Sarah's voice carried urgency. If Apex learns about this, if anyone in the biotech industry learns about this, you'll face threats that make the silk litigation look like amateur hour. Theodore was playing with technology that major corporations and governments would kill to control. He was dying. Why didn't he destroy all this? Why leave it? Maybe he thought someone would continue his work. Maybe he believed it was too important to destroy. Sarah looked at the moths with awe. Or maybe he knew exactly who would inherit this property and trusted you to make the right choices. They sealed the basement, changing the access codes to something only Claire and Sarah knew. They didn't tell Jennifer, didn't tell Ellen, didn't tell anyone else about what they'd found. Some secrets were too dangerous to share until they understood what they actually possessed. But word leaked anyway. Small towns talk, and Hood River was particularly good at spreading information. Mia mentioned the basement to a friend at school. The friend's mother worked at the hospital. The hospital administrator's husband did consulting work for pharmaceutical companies. Within a week, Claire started receiving calls from organizations she'd never heard of. Biosphere International wanted to discuss Theodore's research. Chrysalis Genomics offered to buy the property and all contents for $10 million. No questions asked. The Lepidoptera Preservation Consortium sent representatives who appeared unannounced, demanding access to research they claimed Theodore had promised to share. We're in trouble. Sarah sat in Claire's kitchen after the third unwanted visit in as many days. These people aren't textile companies. They're genetic research firms, pharmaceutical companies, organizations that understand exactly what Theodore was working on. And they want it. What do? We need to understand it first. I'll need to run genetic analysis on the moths, sequence their genomes, figure out exactly what Theodore achieved. Then we can make informed decisions about what to do with this research. Sarah paused. But Claire, I need you to understand the stakes. If Theodore successfully modified Bombyx mori genetics in ways that could be applied to other species, if he developed techniques that could be used in medicine or agriculture, we're talking about discoveries worth billions. And people kill for billions. The death threat started in December. Anonymous emails at first, vague warnings about interfering with important work, suggestions that accidents happened to people who held on to things that didn't belong to them. Claire forwarded them to Ellen, who reported them to the FBI. Federal agents came to the property, interviewed Claire, examined the threats, and assigned what they called advisory monitoring, which meant someone would check in weekly but couldn't provide actual protection. We don't have resources to guard every person who receives online threats. The lead agent, a woman named Martinez, delivered this news with professional sympathy. Unless you have evidence of imminent danger, we can't justify full protection detail. My advice? Get private security. Don't go anywhere alone. Keep detailed records of everything. Claire hired a security company that night. Ex-military contractors who understood physical threat assessment. They installed cameras, upgraded locks, established security protocols. One guard on duty 24/7, rotating shifts, background checked, and trained for exactly this kind of situation. It felt paranoid until the break-in attempt happened on December 18th. 3 men in balaclavas, cutting through the chain-link fence at 2 a.m., moving toward the main building with professional efficiency. A security guard, a former Marine named Davis, confronted them. They fled, but not before one of them shouted something that the security cameras caught clearly. Tell Claire we'll pay twice what anyone else offers, or we'll take it anyway. The FBI returned, took statements, examined footage. Martinez looked grim. These weren't random criminals. Military training, professional equipment. Someone sent them specifically to steal Theodore's research. Who? Could be anyone. Biotech companies use contractors for industrial espionage. Foreign governments recruit scientists who don't care about ethics. Even academic institutions sometimes cross lines when they want research badly enough. Martinez studied Claire with something that might have been respect or might have been concern. You're sitting on something valuable enough that people are willing to commit serious crimes to acquire it. You need to decide what you're going to do with it before someone decides for you. Sarah's genetic analysis came back in January with results that transformed the situation from concerning to terrifying. The modified moths Theodore had created weren't just interesting research subjects. They represented breakthrough technology that could revolutionize multiple industries. He figured out how to activate dormant genetic sequences. Sarah spread printouts across Claire's kitchen table, charts showing DNA comparisons that meant nothing to Claire, but apparently meant everything to scientists. Bombyx mori lost hundreds of traits during domestication, but the genes for those traits didn't disappear. They just got turned off through regulatory suppression. Theodore developed a technique to reactivate them selectively. Flight, navigation, foraging, he brought back traits that had been silent for thousands of years. Why does that matter? Because if the technique works in moths, it might work in other species. Crops that could resist diseases their wild ancestors resisted. Livestock with beneficial traits that were bred out during domestication. Even humans, potentially reactivating genetic resistance to diseases that our ancestors survived but modern populations can't. Sarah's voice carried equal parts wonder and fear. This isn't just about silk moths. Theodore was working on fundamental questions about genetic expression and evolutionary biology. If his techniques can be replicated and applied broadly, we're talking about technology that could change medicine, agriculture, conservation biology. He did this alone in a secret basement. That's what makes it so valuable. He worked outside academic oversight, outside corporate control, outside regulatory frameworks. His research is completely proprietary, unpatented, unpublished. Whoever controls, it controls something that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. Claire looked at the charts, the data, the evidence of her uncle's genius, and felt the weight of responsibility crushing down. I'm a cleaning lady who got lucky. I can't be responsible for world-changing genetic research. I don't know enough. I'll make wrong choices. Then we find people who do know enough. But we have to move fast because the vultures are circling. The vultures arrived in force in February. Dr. Marcus Chun from Biosphere International showed up with a team of lawyers and a contract offering $15 million for the property and all research materials. When Claire refused to sign immediately, he made the threat explicit. Ms. Whitmore, you're in possession of illegally conducted genetic research. Theodore never obtained proper permits for genetic modification experiments, never submitted his work for biosafety review, never got approval from the Institutional Biosafety Committee that's required for this kind of research. If we report this to the EPA and NIH, they'll shut down your operation, seize all materials, and possibly file criminal charges against Theodore's estate. Ellen Rodriguez, who'd flown out from Portland specifically for this meeting, smiled with the satisfaction of a lawyer who'd been waiting for exactly this threat. Dr. Chun, are you seriously suggesting that your organization would report biosafety violations that you've been aware of for years? Because Theodore's financial records show Biosphere purchased research samples from him in 2016, 2017, and 2018, which means you knew about his work and chose not to report it, which makes you complicit in any violations. Chen's professional composure cracked slightly. That's misrepresenting. I have the invoices. Detailed invoices describing genetic material, modified Bombyx mori, Generation 7 Aurora strain. You knew exactly what you were buying. You funded illegal research, if that's what this was, which makes your threat to report it rather interesting. We'll litigate. Please do. Discovery in that litigation will be fascinating. All the other companies Theodore sold to, all the research institutions that knew about his work but never reported it. Everyone will get dragged through very public proceedings about why they participated in illegal genetic research for years without saying anything. Ellen leaned forward. Or you could leave now and hope Claire decides to work with you when she's ready to commercialize this technology through proper channels. Chen left, but his threats hung in the air like smoke. He'll follow through. Ellen warned. They'll report Theodore's violations, claim they were deceived about the nature of his work, and try to force you to surrender everything through regulatory seizure. Can they? Maybe. Depends on how the EPA and NIH interpret regulations regarding privately conducted genetic research. It's murky legal territory. Ellen pulled out her own documents, which is why I've been working on something. A strategy to legitimize Theodore's research retroactively and protect you from regulatory seizure. The strategy involved partnering with Oregon State University's genetics department, donating Theodore's research materials to the institution while retaining commercial rights, and conducting a full biosafety review that would either validate Theodore's work or identify necessary remediation. It meant transparency, oversight, and sharing control with academics who'd want to publish findings. It makes the research public, Ellen explained, which means you lose the advantage of exclusive control, but you gain legitimacy, regulatory approval, and protection from accusations of illegal research. And you maintain commercial rights, which means any applications of Theodore's techniques have to be licensed through you. Claire spent a week wrestling with the decision. The modified moths fluttered in their terrarium, beautiful and strange, representing both possibility and danger. Theodore had worked in secret because he'd feared exploitation, but his secrecy had also made his research vulnerable. Maybe transparency was the better path. Maybe legitimacy provided stronger protection than hiding. She was finalizing the agreement with Oregon State when the fire started. March 15th, almost 2 years to the day since Theodore's death. Claire was at the house with Mia when Davis, the security guard, called with panic in his voice. Fire at the main building. Multiple points of origin. This is arson. I've called 911, but you need to get here now. The volunteer fire department arrived fast, but the building had been soaked in accelerant. Flames consumed the main structure with terrifying speed, eating through wood that had stood for over a century. The Cocoon room, empty but still precious for its history, went first. Then the rearing rooms, Theodore's office, the entryway where Claire had first encountered her uncle's legacy. The firefighters managed to save the basement. The concrete construction resisted the flames, though smoke damage was extensive. The modified moths survived in their terrarium, protected by the underground location. But everything else, all of Theodore's notebooks, all the surface-level equipment, all the physical remnants of his 40 years of work, burned to ash. Claire stood in the pre-dawn darkness, watching smoke rise into the March sky, and understood with perfect clarity that this was just the beginning. Someone had tried to destroy Theodore's research, and they'd failed, which meant they'd try again, probably with methods more direct than fire. The FBI investigation confirmed arson within hours. Professional accelerants, multiple ignition points, clear evidence of criminal intent. But finding who'd hired the arsonist would take time, and Claire didn't have time. The attacks were escalating. You need to make a choice. Martinez, the FBI agent, delivered this assessment with grim certainty. Give someone what they want, whether that's selling the research or donating it to an institution or destroying what remains. Or accept that you're at war with people who have unlimited resources and limited ethics. What about witness protection? For what? You haven't witnessed a federal crime. You just inherited property that people want. That's not grounds for WITSEC. Martinez softened slightly. I'm sorry. I know that's not what you want to hear. But unless we can prove a specific, imminent threat to your life from a specific entity we can prosecute, we can't offer protection beyond advisory monitoring. Sarah moved the modified moths to a secure facility at Oregon State that night, along with all the genetic samples and research data they'd salvaged from the basement. They'll be safe here. Academic institutions have security protocols. And making this public, having the university officially involved, creates witnesses. Makes it harder for anyone to simply steal everything. What about the commercial rights? Still yours. We'll structure this as a research partnership. OSU gets to study Theodore's techniques, publish findings, advance scientific knowledge. You retain licensing rights for any commercial applications. Everyone wins except the vultures who wanted exclusive control. The announcement went public March 20th. Oregon State University press release describing breakthrough genetic research conducted by Theodore Whitmore, now being studied in partnership with his heir. Details about restoration of dormant genetic traits, potential applications in agriculture and medicine, ongoing biosafety review to ensure ethical development. The response was immediate and overwhelming. News coverage from scientific journals, mainstream media, agricultural publications. Some praised Theodore's genius. Some condemned his unsanctioned research. Everyone wanted more details, access, samples, collaboration opportunities. And buried in the flood of attention, another email arrived. This one different from previous threats. More specific, more personal, more terrifying in its implications. Claire, we know about Mia's school schedule. We know about Sarah's lab location. We know where you sleep and where you feel safe. Theodore stole something that belongs to us. Give it back or watch everyone you love disappear. You have 7 days. The email included photographs. Mia getting on the school bus. Sarah entering her lab. Claire's house at night. Windows lit. Shadows visible inside. They've been watching for months, documenting, preparing. Martinez read the email, and her expression transformed from professional concern to genuine alarm. This is actionable. Specific threat with photographic evidence. I can get you protection now. For how long? Until we identify and arrest whoever sent this. And if you can't, if they're using overseas servers and untraceable accounts, if they're contractors hired through multiple cutouts specifically to avoid identification. Claire heard her voice steady, despite the terror flooding through her. How long can the FBI protect a civilian target when the people attacking have unlimited patience and resources? Martinez had no answer to that. Claire called Jennifer, Ellen, and Sarah for an emergency meeting that night. They gathered at Claire's house with FBI protection outside, Davis and his security team inside, everyone aware that decisions made tonight would determine whether they survived what was coming. Sell everything. Jennifer's voice carried pragmatic fear. Take whatever offer gets you out safely. Theodore's research isn't worth dying for. Donate it all to OSU, give up commercial rights. Make yourself worthless as a target. Ellen's legal mind worked through scenarios. If you don't control anything valuable, no one has reason to threaten you. Sarah said nothing for a long moment, studying the email, the photographs, the evidence of surveillance. When she finally spoke, her voice carried an edge Claire had never heard before. There's a third option, one you're not going to like. I'm not liking any of my options right now. We set a trap. Use Theodore's research as bait. Figure out who's threatening you by seeing who bites. Sarah pulled up files on her laptop. I've been analyzing Theodore's financial records, cross-referencing the organizations that paid him against the entities that have approached you. There's a pattern. Most of the biotech firms, the pharmaceutical companies, they want the research, but they're operating legally. Aggressive, but legal. But there's one organization that appears in Theodore's notes without appearing in his financial records. She displayed a document from 2019. Theodore's handwriting, fragmentary notes about a meeting with representatives from something called Helix Solutions. They'd offered him $20 million for his research. He'd refused. They'd threatened him. He'd stopped recording contact with them after that, but his notes suggested the meetings continued in secret. Helix Solutions doesn't exist as far as I can find. No business registration, no website, no legitimate corporate presence. But they appear in Theodore's notes 37 times between 2019 and his death. And every time he mentions them, it's with fear. Sarah met Claire's eyes. I think they're the ones threatening you. And I think they've been after Theodore's research since before he died. So what's the trap? We announce we're selling Theodore's research through private auction. Invite all interested parties, require proof of funds, establish a formal bidding process. See who shows up. See who breaks protocol. The FBI monitors everything, traces communications, identifies the people making threats. Sarah's plan gained momentum as she explained. You stay public, stay visible, stay protected. We control the narrative, control the timeline, control access. Force them to show themselves. It was insane. It was dangerous. It was gambling with her life and Mia's life on the assumption that the FBI could identify and stop threats before those threats became lethal action. It was also the only plan that didn't involve surrender or spending the rest of her life running. We do it. Claire's voice steady. Decision made with the same determination that had driven her to fight Apex, to reopen Theodore's operation, to protect her uncle's legacy when easier paths existed. We set the trap. We find out who's threatening us. And we end this. Martinez agreed to FBI participation on March 22nd. The auction announcement went public March 25th. Bidding would begin April 15th, 3 weeks to allow interested parties to conduct due diligence, verify research value, arrange financing. Minimum bid, $25 million. Requirements, proof of funds, biosafety compliance plans, demonstrated ability to continue research ethically. The response is poured in. Legitimate biotech companies registering interest. University research consortiums proposing collaborative ownership. Pharmaceutical firms exploring licensing agreements. And buried among the legitimate inquiries, communications that triggered alarm bells. Anonymous bidders using cryptocurrency and offshore accounts. Representatives claiming to work for companies that didn't exist. Inquiries that ask questions beyond what public information would reveal, suggesting inside knowledge of Theodore's research that should have been impossible to obtain. One email came from an address that traced to a server in Eastern Europe. We're prepared to bid $50 million. Cash, no oversight, no questions. We know about the 7-day deadline. We know you're scared. Smart people take the money and disappear. Stop pretending you can win this. Martinez's team traced the communication and found nothing. Professional operational security. Whoever sent this has intelligence, training, or access to people who do. This isn't corporate espionage anymore. This is something bigger. Sarah made a discovery on March 28th that confirmed Martinez's fears and transformed everyone's understanding of what they were actually fighting. She'd been cataloging Theodore's research samples, the vials of genetic material stored in the basement freezers. Most were labeled clearly: Aurora, strain generations, color variants, silk quality experiments. But 15 vials had different labels, alphanumeric codes that didn't match Theodore's filing system. She ran genetic analysis on those samples and found something that made her call Claire immediately, voice shaking. These aren't silk moth genes. Some of them are, partially, but they're spliced with human genetic sequences. Theodore was experimenting with gene therapy vectors using moth genetics as the delivery mechanism. What does that mean? It means Theodore wasn't just working on moths. He was developing techniques that could potentially be used to treat human genetic diseases, using modified moth genes to deliver therapeutic corrections to human cells. Sarah's voice carried awe and horror. This is next-generation gene therapy. This is technology that pharmaceutical companies would pay billions to control. This is what they're really after. Why didn't Theodore publish this? Why didn't he work with legitimate medical research institutions? Because he knew what would happen. The research would be patented, monopolized, priced beyond what ordinary people could afford. He was dying of cancer, Claire. He'd seen how pharmaceutical companies operated. Maybe he wanted to develop something that could actually help people instead of enriching corporations. Claire sat in Theodore's basement laboratory, looking at vials that contained potential cures for diseases that killed millions, and understood finally the full weight of what her uncle had left her. Not just silk moths, not just interesting genetic research, but medical breakthroughs that could save lives or become weapons depending on who controlled them. The 7-day deadline arrived April 1st, exactly as the anonymous email had threatened. Claire spent that day in FBI protective custody, Mia staying with Sarah at an undisclosed location, everyone waiting for the promised attack that would force her to surrender. Nothing happened. No calls, no threats, no violence. Just silence that felt more ominous than any explicit danger. They're waiting. Martinez studied surveillance feeds, monitoring communication intercepts, waiting to see what you do, whether you proceed with the auction or back down. Claire didn't back down. The auction date held firm, April 15th. 2 weeks away. 2 weeks for the trap to work or for everything to fall apart spectacularly. And in the silence, in the waiting, Claire began to understand something Theodore had figured out decades ago. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you could possess wasn't weapons or money or power. Sometimes it was knowledge, truth, discoveries that threatened existing power structures. Theodore had spent 40 years protecting knowledge that would have been seized, monopolized, controlled if anyone had known its full value. He'd worked in secret, lived alone, died having never shared what he'd learned because he understood that some things were too important to trust to institutions that serve profit over people. Now Claire held that same knowledge, the same responsibility, the same terrible choice between surrender and resistance. She stood in the Cocoon room's burned shell on April 10th, 5 days before the auction, looking at charred walls where millions of silk cocoons had created art and beauty. The destruction felt symbolic. Everything Theodore had built, all the visible evidence of his work, reduced to ash. But the knowledge survived. The genetic samples, the research data, the techniques he'd developed. Those couldn't be burned away as easily. Mia found her there, having insisted on leaving Sarah's protective location to be with her mother. 12 years old and already understanding that some battles couldn't be won by running. Are we going to lose the farm? Her voice carried the fear Claire had been trying to shield her from. Maybe, probably, if whoever's threatening us is willing to go far enough, then why don't we just give them what they want? Claire pulled her daughter close, breathing in the smell of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her presence. Because Uncle Theodore spent 40 years building something that could help people, real people with real diseases. And if we give it to people who only care about profit, those people will never be helped. The cures will cost millions. The treatments will be patented and monopolized. And Theodore's work will become just another way rich people live while poor people die. So we're protecting it. We're trying to. But I don't know if we can. Mom, you always figured out. You fought Marcus Whitmore. You fought Apex. You brought us here when everyone said you were crazy. Mia pulled back, looking at Claire with eyes that reflected a confidence Claire didn't feel. You'll figure this out too. Claire wished she had her daughter's certainty. Because the truth was she'd been lucky. Lucky that Apex had underestimated her. Lucky that the silk had been valuable enough to fund her defense. Lucky that judges and juries and public opinion had sided with the underdog single mom fighting corporate greed. But this was different. The people threatening her now didn't care about public opinion. They operated in shadows, using violence and fear instead of lawsuits and legal procedure. And Claire was running out of luck. The call came April 12th, 3 days before the auction. Martinez's voice carried urgency that turned Claire's blood to ice. We've identified a credible threat. Someone's been asking questions about the security at Sarah's lab. Professional questions from someone with intelligence training. We're moving both you and Mia into federal protective custody immediately. For how long? Until we neutralize the threat or until the auction completes and we identify who's behind this. 3 days in protective custody. 3 days before the auction that would either expose Theodore's enemies or trigger violence that the FBI might not be able to stop. 3 days to decide whether Claire was brave or suicidal for not surrendering when she still had the chance. She packed a bag for herself and Mia, watched federal agents sweep through her house installing additional security measures, and tried not to think about all the ways this could end in disaster. The modified Moths secured in Sarah's lab represented breakthrough science that could change medicine. Theodore's research, backed up in multiple locations, contained techniques that had never been achieved by legitimate institutions despite billions in funding. And somewhere in the shadows, people with unlimited resources and willingness to kill circled like predators, waiting for Claire to make a mistake that would give them what they wanted. The protective custody location was a safe house outside Portland. 3 FBI agents rotating shifts, encrypted communications, security protocols that felt like living in a prison designed to keep threats out rather than prisoners in. Mia handled it better than Claire expected, treating it like an adventure rather than evidence that their lives had become genuinely dangerous. April 13th brought new developments. Sarah called with results from her continued analysis of Theodore's human gene therapy research. He was close to something revolutionary. Using modified moth genes as vectors could potentially treat dozens of genetic diseases without the complications current gene therapy methods create. And his techniques are elegant, simple enough that they could be manufactured cheaply. This isn't just breakthrough science. This is technology that could actually be accessible to ordinary people, which is exactly why someone wants to bury it or control it. Package it as proprietary treatment, charge millions per dose, turn Theodore's work into another way pharmaceutical companies extract profit from human suffering. April 14th, the day before the auction, brought the message Claire had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. It arrived through the auction website, posted as a bid from an anonymous account, but clearly intended as communication rather than legitimate offer. $100 million. Final offer. Accept by midnight tonight or face consequences that will make you wish you died with Theodore. Your daughter is beautiful. Would be a shame if something happened to her. Would be a shame if Sarah's lab experienced another unfortunate fire. Would be a shame if you spent the rest of your life knowing you could have prevented all of it by being smart. Martinez read the message, face hardening with anger. That's an explicit threat. We can pursue this. You can pursue the server. You can pursue the account. You can pursue whoever set up the anonymous bidding infrastructure. Claire's voice stayed steady despite the fear flooding through her. But you'll find proxies and cutouts and deniability. You'll never find the actual person making the threats in time to stop whatever they're planning. So what do you want to do? Claire looked at the message, at the photograph of Mia they'd attached to make the threat personal, and made a decision that was either brave or insane. Possibly both. We proceed with the auction tomorrow exactly as planned. We see who shows up, and we find out once and for all who's been threatening me, because I am done running scared from people who hide in shadows. The auction was scheduled for 2 p.m. April 15th, to be conducted virtually with bidders participating remotely through secure video connections. Claire would be present via video feed from the safe house, physically protected but publicly visible. Sarah would present Theodore's research, explaining its value and potential applications. FBI agents would monitor all communications, trace connections, identify participants. At 1:45 p.m., Claire sat in front of the camera, Mia beside her, Martinez and her team positioned around the safe house with weapons visible and ready. The auction platform showed 7 registered bidders, 3 legitimate biotech companies, 2 university research consortiums, and 2 anonymous accounts using cryptocurrency and encryption that suggested they'd been set up specifically to hide identity. At 2 p.m., Sarah began the presentation. She explained Theodore's Aurora strains, the breakthrough genetics that had enabled restoration of lost traits, the potential applications in agriculture and medicine. She showed photographs of the modified moths, explained the techniques, described the gene therapy research that made this more than just interesting silk moth science. The legitimate bidders asked questions, proposed partnerships, made offers that started at $30 million and climbed steadily. But the anonymous account stayed silent, watching, waiting. At 2:45 p.m., with bidding reaching $47 million from a legitimate pharmaceutical company, one of the anonymous accounts finally spoke. The voice was male, distorted through filters that made identification impossible, but the words came through clearly. $50 million. Cash. Immediate transfer. All research materials, all genetic samples, all rights. And Claire Whitmore signs a non-disclosure agreement that prevents her from ever discussing Theodore's work. Those are our terms. Accept or face immediate consequences. Martinez's team went into action, tracing the connection, tracking the communication. But Claire already knew what they'd find. More proxies, more dead ends, more professional operational security designed specifically to prevent identification. No. Claire's voice carried through the video feed clearly. Theodore's research is worth more than money. It's worth protecting from people who'd use it to harm rather than help. You're not getting it. A pause. Then the distorted voice again. You just killed your daughter. The screen went black. Every monitor in the safe house shut down simultaneously. The lights flickered and died. Emergency generators kicked in, but communication systems stayed dark. Someone had cut them off, isolated them, created the perfect conditions for an attack that the FBI couldn't call for backup to stop. Martinez moved immediately, positioning agents at entry points, checking perimeter security, trying to restore communications. But Claire felt the trap closing with crystal clarity. Whoever had been threatening her hadn't been planning to attack during the auction. They'd been planning to attack after, when Claire's refusal made violence the only option remaining. The sound of vehicles outside confirmed her fears. Multiple engines, professional coordination, the approach of people who weren't FBI reinforcements. Martinez checked security cameras that still functioned on independent power. 5 vehicles. At least 15 people. They're surrounding the house. We're not prepared for this. One of the agents' voice carried fear. We need backup. We need to protect Claire and her daughter until backup arrives. Martinez's training took over. Common crisis. Defensive positions. Non-lethal force unless lives are threatened. Someone get communications working now. But Claire was already moving, pulling Mia toward the safe house's basement, knowing that the next minutes would determine whether Theodore's legacy survived or died along with everyone he'd tried to protect. And somewhere outside, in vehicles that surrounded them with military precision, the people who'd been hunting her for months prepared to take what they'd tried to buy and failed. The siege was beginning. The basement of the FBI safe house was concrete and steel, designed as a last resort shelter if everything else failed. Claire held Mia close, feeling her daughter's heart racing against her chest, while Martinez positioned agents at the stairwell entrance with weapons drawn. "Mom, I'm scared." Mia's whisper cut through the tactical commands being issued above them. "Me too, baby. But we're going to be okay. Agent Martinez has done this before." Except Martinez's expression suggested she hadn't. Not exactly like this. Safe houses weren't supposed to be breached. Federal protective custody wasn't supposed to fail. The people circling the building had resources and planning that exceeded what the FBI had anticipated. Above them, glass shattered. Multiple entry points breached simultaneously. Footsteps, heavy boots, coordinated movement that spoke of military training. Martinez's voice came through the radio, clipped to her vest. "Federal agents, you are violating federal property. Stand down immediately." The response came as gunfire. Not aimed at agents, but at electronics. Systematic destruction of any remaining communication equipment. They weren't trying to kill FBI personnel, at least not yet. They were trying to ensure no one could call for backup before they achieved their objective, which was Claire, or more specifically, forcing Claire to surrender Theodore's research. Martinez pulled back to the basement entrance, gun trained on the stairwell. 2 agents down, non-lethal injuries. They're using tasers and chemical agents. They want us disabled, not dead. Professional restraint. Why? One of the younger agents asked. Because killing FBI agents brings federal manhunts that never end. Disabling them and escaping before backup arrives just brings investigations that eventually go cold. Martinez met. Don't be dramatic. Theodore was in his 80s. Cancer is what happens when you get old. But Vance's eyes flickered just slightly. Enough to tell Claire that Theodore's paranoia hadn't been paranoia at all. They tried to kill him, or at least accelerated his death, removing obstacles to claiming research they believed belonged to them. "I'm not signing." Claire let the papers fall. "Whatever Theodore took from you, he transformed into something beyond what you could have imagined. That's his, not yours. His legacy, not your property." Vance's pleasant expression vanished. "Then we do this the hard way. Grab them both." 2 men moved toward Claire and Mia. Martinez fired, non-lethal rounds that dropped 1 man, but missed the second. The basement exploded into chaos. FBI agents engaging, trying to protect their charges without lethal force that would complicate the aftermath. Vance's people responding with professional efficiency, using numbers and training to overwhelm the agents. Claire grabbed Mia and ran deeper into the basement, away from the fighting, toward utility rooms that offered no real escape, but at least temporary distance from immediate danger. Behind them, gunfire and shouting echoed off concrete walls. They found themselves in a mechanical room, heating and cooling systems rumbling around them. No windows, no exits, just walls and pipes, and the growing certainty that they were trapped. "Mom, what do we do?" Mia's voice shook. Claire looked around desperately, searching for anything that could help. Her eyes landed on an old intercom system, the kind buildings used before cell phones made them obsolete. She pressed the button, not knowing if it still worked, if anyone would hear. "This is Claire Whitmore. We're being attacked at the FBI safe house on Route 26. Multiple assailants, federal agents down. If anyone can hear this, we need help now." Static answered. Then, miraculously, a voice. Crackling, distant, but clear enough to understand. "This is Hood River Sheriff's Office. We received your emergency signal. Units are en route. ETA 9 minutes. 9 minutes. They just needed to survive 9 more minutes." The door to the mechanical room burst open. Vance entered, gun drawn but not aimed. He looked frustrated rather than murderous, like someone dealing with an annoying obstacle rather than people whose lives he was threatening. "Claire, this is pointless. You can't win. Even if local police arrive, we'll be gone before they breach the building. And we'll keep coming." Tonight, next week, next month. We have unlimited resources and patience. You have a daughter who needs a mother. Be smart. Sign the documents. Let us take Theodore's research. You can keep the silk farm, keep the money from the cocoons. We don't care about that. We only want the gene therapy techniques. Why? What are you going to do with them? Revolutionize medicine. Save lives. Create treatments for genetic diseases that have been death sentences. Vance's voice carried genuine conviction. Theodore was too idealistic. He wanted to give this technology away, make it free or cheap enough that anyone could access it. Noble but naive. Development costs money. Manufacturing costs money. Distribution costs money. We'll charge what the market will bear. And yes, that means only wealthy people will afford treatment initially. But that's how progress works. Wealthy early adopters fund development that eventually becomes accessible to everyone. Except it never becomes accessible. Pharmaceutical companies maintain monopolies, extend patents, charge whatever they want because people pay anything to stay alive. Claire held Mia tighter. Theodore understood that. That's why he refused to work with you. That's why he kept his research secret. He was protecting it from becoming just another tool for extracting profit from human suffering. He was protecting his ego, pretending he could change an entire industry through stubbornness. Vance raised his gun slightly. Last chance. Sign, or I take you both with me in 4 signatures under less pleasant conditions. Sirens cut through the night. Multiple vehicles approaching fast. Vance cursed, motioning to his men. Extract. Now, take the girl. 2 operatives grab Mia, hauling her away despite Claire's screams. Vance grabbed Claire, pressing the gun against her temple. If you want to see your daughter again, you'll come quietly and sign everything we put in front of you. If you fight, if you resist, she dies. Understand. Claire understood. Understood with perfect clarity that these people would do exactly what they threatened. They'd been planning this for years, had watched Theodore die without getting what they wanted, had fixated on recovering research they'd convinced themselves belonged to them. They weren't going to stop because police arrived. They weren't going to surrender because the FBI was involved. They were going to take Mia, and Claire would sign anything to get her back. Except Claire's eyes. They're going to try to take you, grab you and Mia, extract you before reinforcements arrive, force you to sign documents that transfer research rights while holding your daughter hostage. How long until backup? 12 minutes. Maybe 15. Communications are down, but the emergency protocols triggered when we lost contact. Other agents will already be responding. 12 minutes. An eternity when people with guns and military training were systematically clearing the building above them. Claire looked at Mia, saw fear but also trust, the absolute belief that her mother would somehow figure this out like she'd figured out every other impossible situation they'd faced. But Claire had no plan, no brilliant strategy. She was a former cleaning lady hiding in a basement while professional operatives hunted her. All the money from Theodore's silk, all the legal victories against Apex. None of it mattered if she couldn't survive the next 12 minutes. The footsteps above stopped. A voice called down, amplified through a megaphone. Male, authoritative, carrying the absolute confidence of someone who'd already won. Claire Whitmore. We don't want to hurt anyone. We just want Theodore's research. Sign the documents transferring rights to us, and you and your daughter walk away. Refuse, and we'll take you both. You'll sign eventually, after you've watched us make your daughter scream. Your choice. You have 60 seconds to decide. Martinez keyed her radio, trying again to reach backup. Static answered. The attackers had blocked communication somehow, creating a bubble of isolation that wouldn't lift until they were gone or backup physically arrived. I'll do it. Claire's voice surprised herself with its steadiness. I'll sign. Just don't hurt Mia. Ma, no. Mia pulled away, eyes wide. Uncle Theodore worked his whole life for this. You can't just give it away. I can if it means keeping you safe. Martinez put a hand on Claire's shoulder. If you go up there, they'll take you both. They're not letting you walk away. They can't. You've seen too much, know too much. Once you sign, you become witnesses who can identify them. So what do? We stall. We keep them talking until backup arrives. Claire moved to the base of the stairs, calling up. I'll sign, but I need guarantees. I need to know we'll be safe. You have my word. The voice carried practiced sincerity. Sign the documents. Provide access to all research materials and genetic samples, and you'll never hear from us again. We have no interest in hurting civilians. We're just recovering property that Theodore Whitmore stole from us years ago. Stole from you? Who are you? A pause. Then footsteps on the stairs. 3 men descended, wearing tactical gear, but no masks now. They were past the point of hiding their identities. The lead man was perhaps 50, graying hair, surgeon's hands, eyes that held absolute certainty. Dr. Richard Vance. I founded Helix Solutions 20 years ago. Theodore Whitmore worked for me in the 1990s, developing gene therapy techniques using insect genetics as delivery vectors. When his contract ended, he took our research, our techniques, our intellectual property. He built everything on foundations we paid for. We've been trying to recover our property ever since. Theodore's notes never mentioned working for you. Theodore liked to pretend he was an independent genius. The truth is Messier. He was brilliant, yes, but he was also standing on our shoulders, using our funding, building on our preliminary research. Vance pulled out papers, a pen. Sign here. Transfer all rights. Give us access to everything you left behind. And this ends peacefully. Claire took the papers, pretending to read while her mind raced. If Vance was telling the truth, if Theodore had stolen research, then maybe she didn't have the moral high ground she'd assumed. Maybe she was protecting stolen property rather than defending legitimate legacy. But Theodore's notes had been clear. He'd feared Helix Solutions, had refused their money, had worked for decades to develop something beyond what they'd wanted from him. If this was your research, why didn't you sue Theodore? Why the threats and violence instead of legal action? Vance's smile carried an edge. Because Theodore was clever. He destroyed all evidence of his employment with us, wiped records, eliminated paper trails, created plausible deniability. We couldn't prove in court what we knew to be true. So we waited for him to die, waited for his research to pass to someone less careful, waited for you, the cancer that killed him. Did you give him cancer? Except Martinez wasn't down. She appeared in the doorway behind Vance, taser drawn, face bleeding from where she'd been hit, but eyes clear and focused. Federal agent. Drop the weapon. Release the hostages. You're surrounded. This is your only warning. Vance turned, gun shifting from Claire toward Martinez. In that half-second of distraction, Claire did something she'd learned from too many late-night defense courses taken after leaving me as father. She drove her elbow into Vance's ribs, hard enough to crack bone, stepped into his space instead of away, grabbed his gun hand, and twisted with every ounce of strength 15 years of manual labor had built. The gun discharged into the ceiling. Martinez's taser caught Vance's center mass. He dropped, convulsing. Claire ran toward where they'd taken Mia, Martinez behind her, both of them racing through corridors while backup finally breached the building. The next 5 minutes blurred into chaos. Sheriff's deputies flooding in. FBI reinforcements arriving. Vance's operatives trying to escape, but finding themselves trapped between law enforcement converging from multiple directions. Claire found Mia being held in a tactical van outside, grabbed her daughter, and ran back toward the safe house where Martinez was coordinating the takedown. By the time order returned, all of Vance's people were in custody. 12 operatives, including Vance himself, arrested on federal charges that would put them away for decades. Assault on federal agents, kidnapping, attempted extortion, the list kept growing as Martinez documented everything. Claire sat on the safe house steps, holding Mia, both of them shaking with adrenaline crash while emergency medical technicians checked them for injuries. Martinez approached, looking exhausted but satisfied. We got them. All of them. And more importantly, we got Vance talking. He thinks he can negotiate a plea deal by providing information about Helix Solutions' corporate structure. He's implicating everyone involved in targeting you. Is it over? The immediate threat, yes. But Claire, Vance was right about one thing. Helix Solutions has resources. They'll try other approaches. Legal challenges, corporate acquisitions, attempts to purchase controlling interest in Oregon State's research partnership. This fight isn't ending just because we arrested their strike team. Then we keep fighting. Claire pulled Mia closer. We've come this far. We're not surrendering now. The investigation into Helix Solutions took 3 months. What FBI discovered transformed the situation from corporate espionage into something resembling a conspiracy thriller. Helix wasn't just a gene therapy research firm. It was a front for a network of pharmaceutical companies that had been systematically acquiring or destroying competing research for 20 years. Theodore Whitmore had worked for them briefly in 1994, developing preliminary techniques for using insect genetics in gene therapy. When he'd seen how they planned to monopolize his work, charging hundreds of thousands for treatments that cost pennies to produce, he'd quit. He destroyed his employment records, taken his research notes, and disappeared into the Oregon countryside to continue his work beyond their control. They've been hunting him ever since. The financial pressure that led to unpaid taxes. The suspicious deaths of colleagues who might have testified about Helix's practices. Even the cancer that killed Theodore showed signs of having been accelerated by environmental exposure to carcinogens that shouldn't have been present in rural Oregon. They murdered him. Claire read the FBI report with growing horror. Slowly, carefully, using methods that looked like natural causes. They murder my uncle because he refused to let them control his research. Ellen Rodriguez filed wrongful death lawsuits on behalf of Theodore's estate in July. Criminal prosecutions moved forward against Vance and 17 other Helix executives and operatives. The evidence was overwhelming, the crimes too blatant to hide behind corporate structures and plausible deniability. But Claire knew that legal victories, while satisfying, didn't actually solve the underlying problem. Theodore's research still existed. The techniques he developed still had value. And as long as that value existed, people would keep trying to control it. The solution came from an unexpected source. Dr. Sarah Kim had been continuing her analysis of Theodore's work, not just documenting his techniques, but improving them. In August, she made a breakthrough that transformed everything. Theodore was close, but he hadn't quite perfected the gene therapy delivery mechanism. I did, or more accurately, I used his foundation to get the final 5% he was missing when he died. Sarah spread printouts across Claire's kitchen table, genetic sequences that meant nothing to Claire, but apparently meant everything to scientists. And here's the critical part. I published it. Open access journal, Creative Commons license, publicly available to anyone who wants to use it. You what? I made it free, publicly accessible. No patents, no proprietary control, no way for Helix or anyone else to monopolize it. It's out there now, in the public domain, available to researchers worldwide. Claire stared at her. But the commercial value, the billions in licensing, are worthless if everyone has access to the same techniques. That was Theodore's vision, wasn't it? Making this technology available to help people rather than enriching corporations. I just finished what he started. The pharmaceutical industry erupted. Companies that had been positioning themselves to acquire Theodore's research found themselves with nothing to acquire. The techniques were public knowledge. Anyone could use them. Generic manufacturers in India and China began developing treatments based on Sarah's publication within weeks. Helix Solutions' stock price collapsed. Without the monopoly they'd been fighting to secure, their entire business model evaporated. The company declared bankruptcy in September. Assets liquidated to pay criminal judgments and civil settlements. You killed them. Jennifer called with awe in her voice. Not through violence or legal proceedings. You killed them by making their target worthless, by giving away what they were trying to steal. Sarah did it. I just agreed to let her. You gave up billions, Claire. Commercial licensing of that technology was worth billions. I know, but keeping it meant fighting forever. And Theodore didn't spend 40 years in hiding so I could become rich. He spent 40 years developing something that could help people. Now it will. The vindication came in layers, each one more satisfying than the last. The media coverage transformed Claire from embattled single mom into the woman who saved gene therapy from pharmaceutical monopoly. Scientific journals praised Sarah's work while crediting Theodore's foundation. Medical ethicists held up the decision to publish openly as an example of how research should be conducted. And quietly, in hospitals and clinics around the world, treatments began developing based on Theodore's techniques. Genetic diseases that had been death sentences became treatable. Costs that had been astronomical became affordable. Lives saved not in thousands, but in millions, rippling outward from the decision to give away something that could have made Claire wealthier than she'd ever imagined. The Moths played their own role in the story's resolution. The modified specimens Theodore had created, the ones with restored flight capability and wild traits, became the subject of intense scientific study. But Sarah and Claire established protocols that prevented exploitation. Research was conducted ethically, with oversight from multiple institutions. Results were published openly. No one entity controlled the modified moths or the genetic techniques they represented. They're like Theodore, Mia observed one afternoon, watching the moths flutter in their terrarium at Oregon State's secure facility, transformed into something more than what they started as. Not better or worse, just different. And that difference matters. Claire looked at her daughter, now 13, who'd survived kidnapping attempts and witnessed violence, but emerged somehow stronger rather than broken. Is that what happened to us? We transformed. You transformed. You were a cleaning lady who was scared of everything. Now you're someone who fights pharmaceutical companies and wins. I'm still scared of lots of things. But you do them anyway. That's what transformation means. Not becoming fearless, but becoming brave enough to act despite fear. The silk farm became something Theodore probably would have approved of and possibly thought insane. Claire converted the buildings into a research and education center. The rearing rooms became laboratories where students learned sericulture and genetics. The Cocoon room, rebuilt after the fire, became a gallery displaying Theodore's wall art alongside contemporary work by artists exploring the intersection of biology and aesthetics. The property generated no profit. Claire funded operations through Theodore's foundation, keeping it open as a resource for researchers, students, and anyone fascinated by the intersection of science and art that silk moths represented. You're literally giving away money, Jennifer pointed out during one of her quarterly visits. The Cocoon sales generated $6 million. You spent $3 million on this facility, another $1 million on foundation operations, and you're burning through what's left at a rate that'll exhaust it in 5 years. Then in 5 years, I'll go back to cleaning offices. But at least I'll have done something that mattered. Claire walked the property that had become her life's purpose, looking at buildings that had gone from abandoned to condemned to restored to purposeful. Theodore worked 40 years on this. I can work 40 years too, if that's what it takes. But the foundation generated its own revenue streams. Donations from people whose lives had been saved by gene therapy treatments based on Theodore's techniques. Grants from institutions that valued open access research. Partnerships with ethical companies that wanted to support science conducted for public benefit rather than private profit. By year 3 after the Helix resolution, the foundation was self-sustaining. By year 5, it was funding research at 12 universities, supporting 30 independent scientists, and granting scholarships to students from backgrounds like Claire's, people who'd been told they didn't belong in science, but refused to accept that limitation. The legal resolutions took longer. Richard Vance was sentenced to 25 years for kidnapping, assault on federal officers, and conspiracy charges. 17 other Helix executives received sentences ranging from 5 to 15 years. Civil lawsuits yielded settlements that funded additional research and compensated other scientists Helix had targeted over the years. Justice. Ellen delivered the final judgment report with satisfaction. Not just for Theodore, but for everyone Helix destroyed on their way to trying to destroy you. Claire read through the settlements, the criminal sentences, the evidence that people who'd thought themselves above law had been held accountable. It felt good. Not healing exactly. Theodore was still dead, murdered slowly by people who'd valued profit over human life. But accountability mattered. Consequences mattered. The world was marginally better because Helix had been exposed and dismantled. The memorial came together in October, 5 years after Claire had first discovered the Cocoon room. A ceremony honoring Theodore Whitmore's contributions to genetics, sericulture, and ethical science. Scientists came from around the world. People whose lives had been saved by treatments based on his research. Students who'd studied his techniques. Artists who'd been inspired by his work. And at the center of it all, 3 walls recreating the art Theodore had made from silk cocoons. The woman's face, his wife Margaret. The forest scene, the Oregon landscape he'd loved. The moth in flight, representing transformation and the potential contained in creatures most people considered unremarkable. Claire stood before the walls with Mia beside her, both of them older and changed by everything that had happened. She thought about the courthouse bulletin board where she'd found the property listing, the dollar she'd paid, the $347 electricity bill that had seemed insurmountable. The journey from desperate poverty to this moment, surrounded by evidence that one person's stubborn determination could change the world. Dr. Sarah Kim spoke first, explaining Theodore's scientific contributions with precision that made complex genetics comprehensible. Then Jennifer Chun discussed the silk moths themselves, the aurora strains that had funded Claire's initial fight and proven Theodore's breeding genius. Ellen Rodriguez addressed the legal battles, the precedent established for protecting independent research from corporate predation. And finally, Claire spoke, not from prepared remarks, but from the heart, about an uncle she'd met once, who'd given her a business card 15 years ago with words that turned out to be prophecy. If you ever need anything. Theodore Whitmore spent 40 years working in isolation because he understood something fundamental about transformation. It doesn't happen quickly. It doesn't happen easily. It requires patience, dedication, and willingness to continue even when the world insists you're wasting your time. Her voice carried across the gallery, reaching people who'd traveled thousands of miles to honor a man most had never met. He also understood that some things matter more than money, more than profit, more than personal enrichment. He understood that science conducted for human benefit rather than corporate control could actually change the world. She paused, looking at the moth on the wall, its wings spread in perpetual flight. I inherited a property I couldn't afford, containing silk moths I didn't understand, leading to research that terrified me with its implications. I could have sold everything immediately, taken the easy money, and walked away. I almost did dozens of times. But Theodore left me something beyond silk and research. He left me an example. He showed me that transformation requires entering the cocoon stage, that period where everything feels impossible and you're convinced you've made a terrible mistake. The moths spend weeks in their cocoons, completely vulnerable, trusting that something better waits on the other side. Theodore spent 40 years in his cocoon, protecting research that the world wasn't ready to receive ethically. And I spent 5 years in mine, fighting people who wanted to turn his legacy into just another tool for exploitation. We emerged. The moths emerge. Everyone here has emerged from their own cocoons, transformed by patience and determination into something more than what you started as. That's Theodore's real legacy. Not the science, though that matters. Not the silk, though that's beautiful. His real legacy is proving that transformation is always possible, even when circumstances insist you should give up and accept survival as your only goal. The applause started and didn't stop for 5 minutes. People weeping openly, scientists and artists and students and survivors, all of them connected by the thread of one man's stubborn refusal to let his work be controlled by people who valued profit over people. After the ceremony, after the crowds dispersed and the gallery emptied, Claire found herself alone with Mia in the rebuilt cocoon room. The environmental controls hummed softly, maintaining temperature and humidity that no longer served any purpose since no cocoons remained. But Claire had insisted on keeping the systems operational, maintaining the room exactly as Theodore would have wanted. What happens now? Mia asked, 17 years old, preparing for college, planning to study genetics because she'd been inspired by everything she'd witnessed. The foundation is established. The research is protected. Helix is gone. What do you do when the fight is over? The fight's never over. There will always be people who want to control knowledge, who want to monopolize breakthroughs, who think profit matters more than people. We've won this battle, but the war continues. Claire put her arm around her daughter. But you're asking the wrong question. It's not what do I do, it's what do we do? Because this isn't my legacy anymore. It's ours. Yours and mine and Sarah's and everyone who's contributed to protecting what Theodore started. So we keep going. We keep going. We keep fighting. We keep transforming. Claire looked at the empty room that had once held millions of dollars in silk cocoons that had represented hope and terror and salvation. Theodore spent 40 years building this. I've spent 5 years protecting it. You'll spend how many years continuing it? As many as it takes. They left the cocoon room together, turning off the lights, but leaving the environmental controls running, the space breathing softly in the darkness. Outside, the Oregon autumn evening painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, colors Theodore had bred into moth silk through patient decades of careful work. The property stretched around them, transformed from abandoned eyesore into functioning research center. Students working in laboratories, scientists conducting experiments, artists creating installations inspired by the intersection of biology and beauty. All of it funded by Claire's decision to give away rather than hoard, to protect rather than profit, to trust that making knowledge freely available would generate better outcomes than keeping it controlled. In the distance, Claire could see the foundation building where administrative staff managed grants and scholarships. The education center where local schools brought students to learn about genetics and transformation. The archive where Theodore's notebooks and research materials were preserved for future generations. She thought about the courthouse bulletin board 5 years ago, the property listing that everyone else had ignored, the decision to buy something for $1 because she literally had nothing left to lose, the discovery of the cocoon room and everything that followed, the silk, the money, the threats, the legal battles, the siege, the victory. Every step had felt impossible at the time. Every decision had seemed like choosing between bad options and worse ones. But somehow, through stubborn refusal to quit and willingness to ask for help and luck that might have been Theodore watching over her, she'd survived. More than survived. Transformed. The cleaning lady who'd been terrified of electricity disconnection notices now ran a foundation with a $50 million endowment. The single mom who'd worked 3 jobs to stay poor now gave keynote speeches about ethical science and open access research. The woman who'd been told repeatedly that people like her didn't belong in spaces like this had created a space that welcomed everyone, especially people who'd been told they didn't belong. Claire pulled out her phone, opening her banking app. The balance showed $247,000. Enough for comfortable living, enough for Mia's college, enough for security without excess. She'd given away millions, had chosen principles over profit, had prioritized legacy over wealth. And she'd never been richer. A text arrived from Sarah. New research team requesting access to Theodore's modified moth genetics. Want to study restoration of dormant traits in endangered species. Could be huge for conservation. Should I approve? Claire typed back. Approve. Share everything. That's what Theodore would have wanted. 3 dots indicated Sarah was typing. Then, you know that giving this away means we lose any commercial control, right? If they develop something valuable from it, we get nothing. We get to know we helped. That's enough. She pocketed her phone and turned to Mia, seeing her daughter's face illuminated by the setting sun. Young and fierce, and ready to take on whatever challenges came next. Ready to go home? Claire asked. This is home. Mia gestured at the property, the buildings, the legacy they'd built together. Anywhere else is just where we sleep. They walked toward Claire's car. A new one finally. Nothing fancy but reliable, purchased with money that had been earned rather than stolen or extracted. Behind them, the silk farm. Breathed softly in the evening air, alive with purpose, transformed from Theodore's lonely sanctuary into a community resource. The Moths spelled words on the wall one last time as Claire glanced back. Not literally. The cocoons were long gone, sold, and shipped to fashion houses around the world. But in her memory, in the lessons she'd learned, the message remained clear. Patience transforms everything. What seems like ending is only waiting to begin. The greatest treasure isn't what you keep, but what you give away. And sometimes the most broken things, abandoned properties, ignored research, people told they'll never amount to anything, are exactly what the world needs to become whole. Claire Whitmore had paid $1 for an abandoned silk moth farm. She'd received $6 million in silk cocoons. But the real fortune, the one that actually changed her life, had been the understanding that transformation required entering the cocoon stage. That period of seeming death, vulnerability, complete dissolution of what you'd been. She'd entered that cocoon broke, desperate, convinced she was worthless because the world had told her so for 34 years. She'd emerged 5 years later, knowing her worth wasn't measured in paychecks or social status, but in the stubborn refusal to let circumstances define capability. The Moths had shown her. Theodore had shown her. And now it was her turn to show others, to be the example for the next person standing at the courthouse bulletin board, staring at an opportunity everyone else dismissed as worthless, trying to decide whether to risk the dollar they couldn't afford to lose. Risk it, she'd tell them. By the cursed property. Trust the impossible inheritance. Enter the cocoon and trust that transformation waits on the other side. Because sometimes the greatest treasures come wrapped in silk spun by creatures everyone overlooks. Sometimes the most valuable legacies are built by people working alone in the dark. And sometimes the only way forward is through complete metamorphosis, dissolving everything you thought you were to become everything you're meant to be. Claire drove away from the property as night fell completely, Mia beside her, both of them heading toward whatever came next with the confidence of people who'd already survived their worst fears. Behind them, the foundation building's lights stayed on, researchers working late, continuing Theodore's mission into hours he'd never see. The story wasn't ending. It was just transforming again, the way stories do, the way moths do, the way people do when they finally understand that change isn't something to fear, but something to embrace as the only path toward becoming more than what you started as. And somewhere in the archives, in notebooks preserved for future generations, Theodore Whitmore's final words waited to be discovered by the next person who needed to hear them. Thank you for having patience. Transform your life like the moths transform themselves. The greatest treasure isn't silk. It's knowing you're capable of metamorphosis when the world says you're only capable of survival. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.